Hello and welcome to My Baseball History. I'm your host, Dan Wallach. My Baseball History is a long-form interview podcast where each episode I'll talk to someone new who has some sort of association to the game of baseball. No matter who I talk to, we'll talk about how they fell in love with baseball, how their career started, and how they got to be where they are today. Today's episode is brought to you by Willis Money Books in Cooperstown, New York. Willis Money Sr. originally opened a bookstore in Cooperstown in 1979 after running a business out of his house starting in 1975. But Willis Money Books has been in its current location at 139 Main Street in Cooperstown since 1989. The store is open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. year-round. In the summer, though, they're open an extra hour until 6 p.m., giving you 60 extra minutes every single day to find the perfect book to add to your collection. It can be overwhelming because there's over 1 million books inside the building, and as hard as you may try, you're never going to get through them all. But you can make some serious headway if you pick your favorite section and just spend some time digging. And yes, Willis Money Books is located on Main Street in Cooperstown, New York, 900 feet away from the Baseball Hall of Fame. But it is far more than just a baseball bookstore. While they do have thousands of baseball-related titles, and I know because I've personally added dozens of them to my own collection over the years, the baseball section is just one of many inside Willis Money Books. You'll find all of the types of books you'd expect to find at a great used bookstore. Americana, theology, art, history, fiction, including thousands of titles in mystery and science fiction, literary criticisms and biographies, science and natural history, cookbooks, cinema, business and economics, music and opera, children's, crime and law, psychology, and many other categories. There's a great local section too, featuring not only books by local Cooperstown authors, but also books about the rich history of Cooperstown itself. Willis Money has sold everything you can imagine over the years, from $5 copies of The Glory of Their Times by Lawrence Ritter, to an original copy of the Book of Mormon, which sold at auction for $60,000 a while back. In October of 1829, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery obtained the Bible that was later used in the preparation of Joseph Smith's new translation of the Holy Scriptures. It was a quarto-size King James translation published in 1828 by the H&E Finney Company, which was located in Cooperstown, New York. The building where Willis Money is located is historic in its own right, having been built in 1913 and living several lives before becoming the incredible bookstore that it is today. Over the years, 139 Main Street has been a furniture store, a craft store, a dentist's office, a candle store, and the home of a hairdresser. It's been a card shop, an autograph shop, a gas station, and even a car dealership whose showroom was on the second floor, which is why there's a huge ramp to the right when you walk in the building. You're always going to find something new, it's going to be old because it's a used bookstore, but it will be new to you and something that wasn't in the store the last time you visited. And the staff is just awesome. They really know their stuff and they make great recommendations based on what they know you like. Willis Money Books loves to have authors stop by to do book signings, and they always try to do something special during Hall of Fame induction weekend. 2025 will be no different, with Curtis Pride signing there in late July this year. If you're local to the area, you can catch Willis Money at the Cooperstown Antiquarian Book Fair at the Clark Sports Center on June 28th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. But otherwise, make sure to stop into the store during your next visit to the Hall of Fame, or check out their website so you can browse their inventory and order online at www.willmoney.com. That's WILMONIE.com. On today's episode, I spoke with Josh Rawitch, who is the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. There's a lot I could say about the Baseball Hall of Fame, and about Cooperstown, New York, but I think the Hall has already said it best in an article on their website about their history, so I'm just going to read to you what they wrote. The village of Cooperstown is pure Americana, a one-stoplight town nestled between the Adirondacks and the Catskills in central New York. It drew its name from the family of James Fenimore Cooper, whose father William founded the village, and whose works of literature have become American standards. And yet, Cooperstown has become a synonym for baseball, thanks to a story about a Civil War general and the country's love for a timeless game. By the last half of the 19th century, baseball had become the national pastime. The United States was a little more than 100 years old, and baseball had evolved with the country, but there was no definitive answer as to the birth of the game. Enter the Spalding Commission, a board created by sporting goods magnate and former player A.G. Spalding to establish the genesis of baseball. And after a few years of searching, they found their answer. Abner Graves, a mining engineer, proclaimed that Abner Doubleday, a decorated Union Army officer who fired the first shot in defense of Fort Sumter at the start of the Civil War and later served at the Battle of Gettysburg, invented baseball in 1839 in Cooperstown. And that was good enough for the Spalding Commission, which came to its conclusion in 1907. 3 decades later, Cooperstown philanthropist Stephen C. Clark, seeking a way to celebrate and protect the national pastime as well as an economic engine for Cooperstown, asked National League President Ford C. Frick if he would support the establishment of a Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. The idea was welcomed, and in 1936, the inaugural Hall of Fame class of Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, Babe Ruth, and Honus Wagner was elected. 3 years later, the Hall of Fame building officially opened in Cooperstown as all of baseball paused to honor what was called Baseball's Centennial, and as the first 4 Hall of Fame classes were inducted. To mark the occasion, Time magazine wrote, "The world will little note nor long remember what Doubleday did at Gettysburg, but it can never forget what he did at Cooperstown." In the years since, the Doubleday myth has been refuted. Doubleday himself was at West Point in 1839. Yet, the myth has become strong enough that the facts alone do not deter the spirit of Cooperstown. The National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, surely the most well-known sports shrine in the world, continues to thrive in the town where baseball's pulse beats the strongest. But in the years following the opening of the Hall of Fame on June 12, 1939, the museum has become much more than just home to baseball's biggest stars. The Hall of Fame is the keeper of the game. The Hall of Fame's collections contain more than 40,000 three-dimensional artifacts, such as bats, balls, gloves, and uniforms, donated by players and fans who want to see the history preserved. The museum's curators use the artifacts, whose number grows by about 400 each year, to tell the story of the national pastime through exhibits. The museum itself is a melding of 5 buildings sewn together via several renovation and expansion programs. Today, the museum easily accommodates more than 3,000 visitors per day during the peak season. The artifact collection is housed in climate-controlled rooms to protect the delicate leather, fabric, and wood materials used in baseball. The museum promises, in exchange for the donation of an artifact, to care for an item in perpetuity, which means the effects of temperature and humidity must be constantly regulated. The museum's first accessioned item was the Doubleday baseball, which was discovered in a farmhouse in nearby Fly Creek, New York in 1935 and dates to the 19th century. Then in 1937, Cy Young, who was elected to the Hall of Fame that year in the second year of voting, generously donated several artifacts, including the 1908 ball from his 500th career win and the 1911 uniform he wore with the Boston Braves. Young's donations generated new offers from other players as well as fans. Thousands of fans attended the opening of the Hall of Fame on June 12, 1939, and that same year another Cooperstown tradition was started with the launch of the annual Hall of Fame game. For 70 years, the Hall of Fame game became an annual celebration of the game as 2 Major League Baseball teams played an annual exhibition contest at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown. Though the game was discontinued in 2008, the legends live on with the advent of the Hall of Fame Classic, an annual event over Memorial Day weekend featuring Hall of Famers and former Major Leaguers at historic Doubleday Field. The field itself dates back to 1920, and the first grandstand was built in 1924. Thanks to the Works Progress Administration money during the Great Depression, Doubleday Field was expanded again in 1934. Today, the field is occupied non-stop during the spring, summer, and fall as high school athletes, collegiate summer league stars, and recreational league players savor the chance to play on hallowed ground. The A. Bartlett Giamatti Research Center is also part of the museum experience, and the center's library contains more than 3 million documents on the history of baseball, ranging from reference books to the Green Light Letter, sent by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Baseball Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis in January of 1942, urging Landis to keep baseball going during World War II. As an educational institution, the museum offers outreach programs for audiences of all ages. Through virtual classroom technology, Cooperstown is transported to schools across the country with video conference lessons featuring any one of 16 learning modules. The Hall of Fame welcomes 250,000 visitors annually, and the museum's collections contain more than 200,000 baseball cards, 250,000 historic baseball photographs and images, and 14,000 hours of original audio and video recordings. So that's a little bit about the place, but now on to our guest. After growing up in Los Angeles, Josh Rawitch attended Indiana University, where he received a bachelor's degree in sports marketing and management with a minor in business. He has taught strategic sports communications at both Arizona State University and the University of Southern California. He joined the Dodgers in 1995 and spent parts of 5 seasons in marketing before moving to public relations. He left the organization for 2 seasons and became one of MLB Advanced Media's earliest employees, serving as a beat reporter covering the Dodgers in 2001 and then the Giants in 2002. Josh came to Cooperstown following 15 seasons with the Dodgers and 10 seasons with the Arizona Diamondbacks. In Arizona, he served as the Senior Vice President of Content and Communications, overseeing numerous departments within the club's business operations. Thanks to his being fluent in both English and Spanish, Josh has overseen media relations during trips to Mexico, China, Taiwan, and Australia, in addition to goodwill tours of Japan, New Zealand, and the Dominican Republic. In 2009, 2013, and 2017, he served as venue press chief for the World Baseball Classic. Josh is currently in his 5th year as president of the Hall of Fame and his 31st season working in baseball. He oversees the daily operation of the nonprofit educational institution, which employs nearly 100 full-time staff members with the mission to preserve history, honor excellence, and connect generations. During his first 4 years at the Hall of Fame, Josh has focused on strategic growth opportunities that help the 85-year-old institution continue to stay relevant with the next generation of fans and visitors. This includes the incorporation of technological advancements, unique events such as the Savannah Bananas game in 2023, and the creation of the Souls of the Game, Voices of Black Baseball, an exhibit which opened in 2024 as part of a 4-day event that also featured the first ever Hall of Fame East-West Classic, a sold-out tribute to the Negro League's All-Star Game. Josh has previously served as a trustee for the Arizona Sports Hall of Fame and on the board of directors for the Greater Phoenix Chamber, Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, ASU's Sports Business Advisory Board, and the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. He has helped organize Major League Baseball's Winter Meetings annual auction, which has raised more than $2 million for various charities. Josh was honored with the 2018 Robert O. Fischel Award, which goes to the active, non-uniformed representative of Major League Baseball whose ethics, character, dedication, service, professionalism, and humanitarianism best represent the standards of the longtime baseball PR executive for which it is named. In this episode, we cover lots of ground. Josh tells us about the inner workings of the Hall of Fame, from how they acquire new artifacts from historic achievements to deciding what gets put on display and how things are presented. We find out what Josh learned in a class taught by legendary basketball coach Bobby Knight while he was a student at Indiana University. We learn about the Hall of Fame voting process, who decides who gets to be on the ballots, and how the inductees are chosen. And we hear what it's like to work at a job where you get to talk to Hall of Famers every single day. With all of that information and much, much more coming at you, it may be helpful to follow along with the episode's liner notes on our podcast website. If you're new to the show, don't worry. You'll still be able to enjoy this episode without the extra help from the liner notes. But longtime listeners love the photos and links we put up on the website, which will give you a better understanding of the things Josh and I are discussing and provide some context when needed. The liner notes can be found on the My Baseball History website, which is online at www.shoelesspodcast.com. If you want to follow along, head to the website where you'll see the Josh Rawitch episode listed first on the main page under latest episodes. Click on that and you'll be ready to follow along. There's an embedded media player right on the page, so you don't need to have multiple windows open while you listen or fumble around with multiple devices. If you want to catch up on any of our earlier episodes, you can click on the tabs at the top of the website to go back through past interviews from any of our previous seasons and see a full list of everything we have to offer so far. Everything in the liner notes goes in chronological order of how we talked about them in the interview, so you should easily be able to keep your place as you listen. After the interview, we'll do a recap of what you just heard, adding some extra insight and hopefully answering any questions that may have come up as you listened. I'll also explain how you'll have a couple chances to answer a trivia question to win a prize, so stick around until the end of the episode for that too. But now, here's my interview with the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, Josh Rawitch. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up.
I grew up in a town called Northridge, California, which most people know because we had an earthquake my senior year of high school. And then the next year, the Little League team went to the World Series. They were the earthquake kids. Yeah. So part of the San Fernando Valley outside Los Angeles and kind of your typical suburb, but grew up a Dodger fan and got a chance to work for them for a very long time. So very much an LA kid.
What is your favorite memory from playing in Northridge Little League?
Oh, man. Well, certainly the thing that sticks out the most is when I set the Little League record for most consecutive homers given up. I gave up 4 home runs in a row, which seems almost impossible in a Little League when people didn't hit home runs back in the day. But, I mean, I was decent enough that I made some all-star teams and had some good years and had a ton of fun playing baseball growing up.
A record's a record.
Absolutely. I really don't think that anybody's ever going to get to 5. Like, after the third one, I remember we all looked at the coach like, are you actually still leaving me in here?
Right.
But yeah, I don't think anybody's ever going to hit 5 in a row. And the crazy thing is I can still remember the kids' names. I can still see the ball going out. One of them was left-handed, 3 of them were right-handed. It's amazing to me that sticks out 35 years later.
Yeah, that's so funny. People talk about what baseball records will never be broken, and Cy Young, of course, but like nobody's ever going to throw 3 no-hitters in a row. So Johnny Vandermeer's safe.
Yeah,
like, he will always at least own the record partially.
Yeah, a tie. Somebody could get 2. It's not crazy to think, but you're right. I don't see how 3 would ever happen.
Yeah. So you said you were a Dodgers fan growing up, and the first game that you remember was down the stretch in 1983 at Dodger Stadium. What do you remember specifically about that game?
What's crazy is I can remember why we picked that game. I'm sure it was just a random thing that my dad bought tickets for, but I remember that their main players weren't playing. They had already clinched, and there were guys I had never heard of in the lineup. So you go to the game and you're hoping to see your favorites. I can vividly remember an outfielder named Cecil Espy leaping and kind of robbing a home run or catching a ball up against the wall. And I think that's how I remember when the game was. I don't remember anything else from that game other than the starters weren't playing and Cecil Espy was.
What made Steve Sachs your favorite player growing up?
He played second base, which was my position, but I think the way he went about playing, he was obviously an all-star back in the day. He sprinted to first on walks, and so I always did that in Little League, even all the way in through high school. I would sprint to first base after I drew a walk, and I think it was just the way he went about it. Stole bases, played hard, got dirty, was kind of the spark plug for the 88 Dodger team, homered on the first at-bat of the season that year, and so you just... I don't know. Somehow I've always loved the guy, and he just seemed like a fun guy. And certainly as I've gotten lucky enough to get to know him, he is as fun as I expected he would be.
Yeah. A lot of kids' earliest baseball memory revolves around opening packs or boxes of baseball cards in some way. How did your Uncle Marvin get you started?
So when I was somewhere around that age, 6, 7 years old, my uncle had a massive baseball card collection. He lived in Boston. I didn't know him really at that point. I don't even know if I'd met him when I was that little, but he sent a pack of baseball cards to me, and I can remember the first 2 cards that I can visibly see was it was a Fleer card of Mike Ramsey and Jerry Martin. I can picture the cards, and something about opening that pack of cards, like all of us, you just become addicted to it, and so I just became addicted like every other kid. And then my brother and I really became pretty big collectors through that whole boon of the 80s and early 90s when cards were starting to get mass-produced and keeping track of the prices in Beckett and all that sort of stuff was exactly what we were doing growing up.
Yeah. You wanted to go into broadcasting when you were first thinking about possible careers. What was it like growing up with Vin Scully as your home team's broadcaster? Like, did you realize how great he was, or did you just think this is how every broadcaster is because you were too young to have any other frame of reference?
Yeah, the funny thing is you don't, when you're a kid, you don't realize how good he was. Certainly when I was growing up, I can picture my dad having to run errands in a pet store and me sitting in the car listening to Vin on the radio or occasionally getting him on TV because back in the day, they only broadcast Dodger games when they were on the road in San Francisco. You just couldn't get all that many games. So I certainly didn't grow up thinking I want to be a broadcaster. I didn't grow up realizing how good he was. But I think by the time I got to senior year or so and I was starting to think, what do I want to do in college? I realized, man, this guy is basically the best of the best. And then obviously having the chance to work with him for so many years at the Dodgers and realizing nobody does it that long, nobody does it that well, nobody does it by themselves anymore. All these incredible things about this guy. And on top of that, he was just the kindest, nicest human being. It was just, they say don't meet your heroes, but this guy absolutely was a hero you want to meet. And I just forever grateful that I got a chance to know him.
Yeah, when you think of the lineage between he and Connie Mack, they had covered baseball or been a part of baseball since the 1880s, I think.
That's wild. I've heard that stat before, and it just kind of blows your mind. And I think part of what makes a broadcaster, when you think about the people who win the Frick Award here, part of what makes a broadcaster so meaningful is it does connect generations the same way this museum does. I mean, I think about not only did I listen to Vin, my dad listened to Vin, my grandparents listened to Vin, which is crazy. And then Vin announced my son's birth on the air. And he was probably not old enough to really, by the time Vince, I guess actually I think about it, he probably was. My son definitely listened to Vin in his final few years. So, that's 4 generations of a family listening to one broadcaster. And in most cities, there is somebody who falls into that category that has connected generations of families by their voice and by being in your house every single night or in your car and I guess now on your phone.
Right, yeah. One of your broadcasting professors at Indiana University told you to send your resume to your hometown team, and that led you to working for the Dodgers for about 15 years. For anyone who's in college right now or looking to get a job with their favorite team, what do you think is the best way to get their foot in the door?
I always tell students when I get a chance to spend time with them that if you're lucky enough to be at a university that has an athletic department, you've got to find a way to get involved in it. I was very lucky that IU had this student athletic board that was essentially just like you volunteer to help set up chairs at the football game, whatever. You get something on your resume that shows that you want to work in sports. You're not just a sports fan who won their fantasy league and you're into baseball cards. Like, you actually have to prove that you want to work in it. And so I was just actually back at IU last week, and I got a chance to speak to that exact same Intro to Sports Management class that was where my whole career started. I said, when we get resumes from students, my thinking is, what are they doing at their university? If they're not involved in the athletic department there, and there is an athletic department, it just tells me that there's not enough seriousness behind what you want to do. And similarly, if they are involved in the athletic department, it tells you that they're making sacrifices. There's a Friday night and everybody might be out at the bars or at a party and they're working a wrestling meet or a volleyball match. And I think that shows that you care about sports more than just as a fan, and I want to actually have a career in it, because it's a very different thing being a fan and working in sports.
Yeah, I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale and went there specifically because of their radio and television program. I was lucky enough that at my high school we had a radio station, so I was 4 years on-air experience there calling basketball games, and then in college I called 6 different sports. And like you said, like, there were sacrifices made. You can't go out every weekend night, and you can't get too drunk when you go out on those nights.
It's the same. It's honestly the same as once you get out of school and you start realizing, particularly baseball. I mean, it's a grueling season, no matter what department you're in. It's certainly more if you're in PR or a trainer or stadium operations, but any department, 162 games is crazy, and 81 home games. It's just nothing else has even half that, really.
Right.
A couple sports have exactly half that. So I think it does show, hey, this is a serious thing I want to do. It's not just a fly-by-night idea like, hey, I think it'd be fun to work in baseball. Like, same thing with working in the minor leagues. When I see the minor leagues on someone's resume, I go, okay, this person understands what it means to work in sports.
Yeah, and paid their dues.
Absolutely.
You're bilingual and spent a semester abroad in Spain. How did you learn Spanish, and why did you think that was an important thing to do?
The short answer is I didn't think it was an important thing to do. I took Spanish in high school just like anybody else. I really didn't take it seriously. But then when I got to the Dodgers after my freshman year as an intern, I asked the assistant GM at the time, a guy named Robert Schweppe, hey, if I want to be a GM, because I had started to think that's what I wanted to do, what should I go do to improve my chances? And he gave me a couple pieces of advice, but one of them was learn Spanish. It would be incredibly valuable. So I went back my sophomore year and I took it for real and I took it seriously, and I started to learn how to not be afraid of using an accent, because I do think once you switch to actually trying to sound like what you're hearing, that's when I think it becomes real, speaking any other language. And then studying abroad, I wound up having a girlfriend in Spain, which definitely helped. She was trying to learn English and I was trying to learn Spanish, so I would speak to her in Spanish and she would speak back to me in English.
Cool.
And then there was one off season between 2001 and 2002 where I was working for MLB.com, and I asked if they would kind of take me off payroll and let me backpack around South America for the off season, and they were happy to take me off payroll. And I basically did 3 months at like $3,000 total. Like, I just was riding buses all around the continent and mostly by myself, talking to locals and seeing the world. And that obviously gets you very good at the language very quickly. And then I was fortunate towards the back end of that, I called my boss, who was in charge of content at MLB.com. I was in Bolivia, I believe, when I made this phone call. And I said, hey, I'm supposed to be coming home in a couple of weeks, but if you want to send a laptop down to me in Venezuela, I'll cover the Venezuelan playoffs and stay at a cheap hotel, and you don't have to pay. And so it was the first time MLB had ever had anybody covering the Caribbean series in Latin America. And that was awesome. I got to extend my trip by a month. And I still, to this day, keep in touch with Venezuelan journalists I met 25 years ago and Venezuelan players. I mean, a lot of them remember me as this guy with a long goatee and long hair. And I was like, that's literally the only time in my life I ever had a goatee and long hair. And you guys think that's what I look like all the time. But I loved my time in South America.
For someone coming up who wants to have a career in baseball, do you think being bilingual is a necessity at this point, whether it's Spanish or Japanese or another language in addition to just knowing English?
Necessity, no, but certainly a huge advantage. I mean, the number of times I have looked around and found myself, just happened recently, the Diamondbacks asked if I would MC the opening of their academy in the Dominican Republic, and I got a chance to go down and be on stage and introduce the president of the country. And I mean, I remember looking around and thinking, there's no way they asked me to do this if I didn't speak the language. And being able to speak to players when they first get to the big leagues and maybe their language isn't as strong as it gets later in their career, coaches, trainers, broadcasters, media. I mean, it's just incredibly valuable. And certainly now Japanese would be an unbelievable language to learn. But one benefit of learning another language that I don't think I realized. When I was young, I was doing it because I thought it was going to help advance my career. But I started to realize you can talk to hundreds of millions of people in the world that you couldn't have talked to. So yes, it's been helpful professionally, but on a personal level and just a human level, I look and I just think, man, what an amazing skill to have that I'm very lucky I was. Quick side story, I called Robert Schweppe years later. I wound up on a delegation to Colombia with like a couple of business leaders in Arizona, and we're kind of kicking around doing something really cool. And I just thought, there's no way I would have been invited to be on this if I didn't speak Spanish. So I sent a note to this guy, Robert Schweppe at the Dodgers. He had long since left the Dodgers. And I said, hey, thanks so much for telling me to do this. This has been an incredible experience. And he said, do you have any idea how many kids I told to do this? And none of them actually did. You're like the only one that actually did it. So I guess I look at it, and I just told these students last week at Indiana, you get all this advice, and you're not going to use all of it. Mm-hmm. What I say to you today, you might get one thing out of it. But for me, that one thing that he said, changed my life.
Yeah, unbelievable. Over the course of your time with the Dodgers, you held many different roles. You started as an intern, like you said, and you were actually the first intern to return for a second summer. But May 18th, 1998 was your first day as a full-timer. What do you remember about that day?
Well, it was basically 3 days after the Dodgers had traded Mike Piazza, and I had driven across country, and basically the start of my job in the marketing department, at the time it was called Advertising and Special Events, was to help take Mike Piazza down from everything in Los Angeles. So pretty crazy that's, you think about a franchise icon, future Hall of Famer, never could have imagined I'd be sitting here doing this interview when my career started full-time with taking a Hall of Famer off of LA's billboards and bus shelters. And he was everywhere in the city.
Because he wasn't just the face of the franchise, like he was the face of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He was the biggest thing in Los Angeles at that point, and it was such a big deal that they had traded him.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, in so many ways, people don't really remember. The talent that the Dodgers got back was pretty insane too.
Yeah.
And then he was gone from the Marlins within like a week or 10 days. There's such a fascinating time. The trade wasn't really done by the GM. It was done by two Fox executives that basically didn't want to give Mike an extension, so they just did it and told the GM, hey, we traded this guy to Florida. And all of that stuff, we look now, how crazy would that be if, I don't know, somebody from Rogers in Toronto just called the Blue Jays GM and said, hey, we just dealt Vlad to the Phillies. Like, it just would never, it would be like the biggest story in sports ever. That was what it was.
But then for the return to be great, the players that they got in return wasn't a bad trade.
No, it wasn't. And what's funny is as you spend more time in the game, you realize these are humans, these are people. And one of the things that I remember being sad about, in addition to the fact that the Dodgers had traded our best player, they had traded Todd Zeile, who had just signed a under market value deal because he wanted to stay at home. He didn't go maximize his value, and then didn't have a no trade deal, and he got sent off. And that sort of stuff, it just sticks with you. As I got to know Todd later in life, like, there's no doubt that impacts your life. It impacts your family. All these things that it's just crazy. Nobody really thinks about when you read about a trade.
And it's the last time I'm sure he offered to take a discount at a team.
No doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
You worked in marketing for 5 years and then shifted to public relations. You worked for the Dodgers during kind of I wouldn't necessarily call it a tumultuous stretch in their history.
Oh,
but
it was tumultuous.
Definitely a transitional phase for the franchise. The team had 4 different owners and ownership groups over the course of your time there. How did that lack of continuity in the leadership affect you? Like, did each new boss you had to answer to have a different vision for what you should be doing and how things should be run?
Yeah, that is an awesome question. The answer is yes. I think it affected me in that, I remember thinking how years later, like, no wonder we've been so bad on the field and so we've so much turnover. There's no way to have any continuity. So it helped me understand the value of stability. If you look at the Dodger teams that won back in the day, Alston and Lasorda and Campanis and O'Malley and all these people that were there for 20-something years, Tommy Lasorda had plenty of bad years. They stuck with him, and he rewarded them with more championships. And so, ultimately, I can remember a conversation with Frank McCourt in 2008. We were in Beijing. It was a bunch of us at dinner. It was Frank and Jamie and Joe Torre, and I think his wife Allie was there, and a handful of others. And I remember Joe saying that this young team reminds me of the young Yankee teams of Jeter and Bernie.
Core 4.
And, Core 4, all that group. And I have no idea what would have given me the guts to say this, but I said, but Joe, one of the things I think is different is that when these guys came through the minors and they got to the big leagues, they knew who their manager was going to be, you. They knew who the GM was going to be. They knew who the coaching staff was going to be. And we keep essentially turning over from we had 5 managers, I think, in that period,
Right.
my early years, Davey Johnson and Jim Tracy and the whole Glenn Hoffman, Bill Russell. I mean, it's crazy, a large number of these guys. And Frank kind of said, you're right, Josh, we need to stop with the turnover. It's not good for us. And it was just validation that, like, when you see a place turn over that much, that is, obviously a bad sign of what's going on at the top, but also it's just very hard to succeed, because I did have a lot of bosses who wanted to do things differently. But I prided myself on, I don't know how long this boss is going to be here. I think I had like 7 bosses in 8 years. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I don't know how long this person's going to be here, but I'll do my best to help them assimilate, and maybe over time it will help me. And most of the time they would fire someone above me and then give me that job and give me a new boss. And so it just, I don't know, it was definitely a learning experience. It was definitely tumultuous. It was a very crazy time to have that many different ownership groups and GMs and managers, but it's also helped me get to know so many people in the game.
Yeah. One
of the people I'm very close with, Dan Evans, is, I don't know the right way to put it, a casualty of that era where he had success. He did some great things, but new ownership came in. They wanted their new GM, and Paul DiPodesta came in. I would never know the head of the Browns football operations if it weren't for that. And then Ned Coletti. And so as you get to know a lot of these people, you realize the game is, in a lot of ways, it's people moving from one city to the next and rebuilding their teams in different places.
Yeah. After the Dodgers, you worked as a beat reporter for MLB Advanced Media and helped make the transition from every team having and running their own website to MLB running the websites for each team under a cohesive brand, look, and feel. How did your experience as a beat writer help you in your career in media relations?
I look at those 2 years and I just think, what luck did I have that somebody at the Dodgers, this guy Brent Shire, thought, there's this new thing starting and you ought to go be our content guy for the website. When I went, it was like, okay, I'll get a chance to travel maybe a little with the team. It was a little higher position than the entry-level PR job I was in, but I had no idea how much it would help me in seeing what media members need on a daily basis. I basically took the job, and a week later they announced, okay, you guys are all beat writers covering the team. And I remember thinking, I had no idea that that's what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. I had 2 parents who were journalists, so that helped me understand, I guess, a little bit about, and I had written for the school paper at Indiana, but I was not a journalist trained by any means. And yet every day I had to go to the ballpark and try to come up with not come up with is the wrong way, figure out what the storyline was that day, write a notebook, write a game story. And this was the early days of MLB.com, where you would not only do all that, but you would find your photos, upload them to the site, create the whole website essentially. Mm-hmm. And then you'd have somebody back in New York reviewing your work, and you'd sit in the press box for an hour while they edited and told you whether it was good, and then you could go home. And so I look at, in the years after that, from I guess 2003 beyond, just knowing how a reporter thinks helped me think along with them, sometimes helped me think ahead of them, made me think of, okay, what question are they going to ask, and can I prepare this manager or this GM or this owner for what's coming? And I have incredible respect for journalists. Obviously, I grew up in a family of them. I believe deeply in all the important principles of journalism. And I think it's kind of cool that I got to do it for a couple of years, but it was not for me. I did not love the standing around in the clubhouse and just the amount of what often felt like I was annoying the people that I was there to cover. It wasn't for me. And ultimately I got lucky that the Dodgers called and said, hey, do you want to come back and be the assistant PR director?
Yeah. You went back to the Dodgers for a little bit after that and working as the vice president of communications. Then you worked for the Diamondbacks for about a decade. What were your different roles with Arizona?
So I came in essentially as, I think, senior vice president of communications, and it was a somewhat lateral move. But what I think Derek Hall, the president, told me was, I'm going to keep giving you more responsibility while you're here. So don't look at it as the job you're coming for right now. Look at it as how I'm going to grow your career. And so ultimately, I think I got there and I might have been in charge of PR and publications, but then I think we added photography one year and social media the next year, and then eventually graphic design department and the big screen board. And Derek did an incredible job of basically teaching me what it takes to run an organization. I think he saw in me something that maybe at that age I didn't even necessarily see in myself. And so there were times he would bring me on a trip to the Dominican Republic, or he'd bring me to Mexico, or he'd bring me into a meeting that had nothing to do with my area of expertise. And he would just say, hey, why don't you come with me to this speaking engagement at the military academy or something? I'd get a chance to just see what it takes to run an organization and understand what it means to create a corporate culture. And I mean, I remember the day we signed Zach Greinke. I think most people will remember that we were not expected to sign Zach. Nobody had any idea that we were even in on it,
right?
Because we weren't until literally that morning. I came in, my office was right across from Derek's, and I wandered in one day. I was like, "What's going on?" He goes, basically, in not quite these exact words, but sit down, shut up, and just watch what happens over the course of the day. And I got to sit there while they essentially negotiated all day long. And we had our GM was out of town. I think our assistant GM and Tony, our chief baseball officer, Tony LaRusso, were there. And just watching this thing unfold and watching as it started to break on social media. I remember at one point somebody tweeted out, I think it might have been Rosenthal, tweeted out, the Diamondbacks are pursuing Greinke. And somebody wrote, on what charges? Like, it was this whole joke. Like, just nobody thought we were part of it. Anyway, long story short, Derek did an amazing job of letting me be in places that maybe weren't necessarily my knowledge, and it allowed me to learn things. And that's essentially what he just kept adding more departments until this opportunity came along.
From a number of the stories you've told today, it sounds like another good piece of advice you have for people is to have a current and valid passport.
Oh, yes. If you love international travel the way I do, yes. I mean, I just love going to Spain, as you asked about before. It changed my whole view of the world. I'd been, I think, to Mexico once at that point. I had no real idea what the world was. I knew Southern California and Indiana. I think when my eyes opened to the way different parts of the world can change you, everything in my life changed. And that happened in Spain. And I can't encourage people enough, students, to study abroad. And then really, as you just look at how the sports industry has become so global, if you understand how that all works together, you've got a better opportunity to have success in that area.
And speaking of international baseball, you were also the venue press chief for multiple World Baseball Classics. What is your favorite World Baseball Classic memory, whether it was something that happened on the field during a game or otherwise?
Well, I'd say there's probably two. To me, the Japan-Korea championship game at Dodger Stadium might be, if not the best, one of the top 2 or 3 sporting events I've ever attended. I mean, it was insane to watch. Dodger Stadium was shaking, and there were people still showing up in the 8th inning trying to buy tickets just to say they were there. Like, it was nuts. And so I think that was the 2009 World Series that I look fondly upon. But then also 2017, when I was fortunate enough to kind of run media operations in Seoul, South Korea, I mean, again, being abroad was really cool, spending 10 days kind of doing all sorts of really neat stuff in a venue that was just totally different. And then Team Israel was there as basically an afterthought. I'm staring at a Team Israel cap in my office here with a yarmulke right above it that's from the World Baseball Classic. I remember being down on the field when they did the national anthems and when they played the Israeli anthem, and all the guys took off their caps and they had yarmulkes on. For someone who grew up Jewish like me, it was such a moment. Like, man, this is crazy that most of these guys they had a Jewish parent, they were an American minor leaguer, but here they are representing their homeland. Was just, I mean, I get chills thinking about it. It was such a cool moment. And then they somehow wound up beating all the best teams there and moving on to Tokyo, and everybody's like, what is this? So, I mean, the WBC, early on, I recognized what an awesome tournament that is, and I'm so proud that I've had a chance to be a part of several of them. And I was supposed to be the Team Israel communications person for the last one, and then I got this job, and I didn't really think I could disappear for a week or a month. But I can't say enough good things about the WBC. I hope more baseball fans get into it.
Yeah. While you were in Arizona, you were an adjunct professor at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University, where you taught sports communication. But when you were at Indiana University as a student, you took a class called The Technique of Coaching Basketball, which was taught by Bobby Knight. What did you learn in that class about motivation?
Oh, man. First of all, I got to give you a ton of credit for the amount of research you've done into my career. I can't think of anybody who's ever paid this much attention to it. But
you've done some impressive things.
It's some fun things, and that's an example of one that, like, nobody could get into this class. I remember sitting at the terminal, and I clicked on it to see it, and I was like, there's a seat there? And I think I might have been a sophomore, and everybody else was, like, seniors. So I had dumb luck that I got into this class, and the first day of class, Bobby Knight walks in. He didn't teach every class. He taught like every second or every third class, but he came in on the first day. I could picture the room. It wasn't particularly large, but maybe 30, 40 students at most. And all these kids are staring at him as he's walking in, and this guy is like a deity to
Bobby
Indiana.
Knight, yeah.
Exactly. And that, I mean, I didn't grow up there, but these kids grew up, and this was their god.
Yeah.
And he'd walked in. I can like picture all the kids' heads turning and following him as he walked across the room. And he came up to the front of the class and essentially said, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about coaching on the first day. And he picks some little pudgy kid in the middle of the class and tells him, all right, go run over to that door frame, jump up and touch as high as you can in the door frame. And the kid kind of waddles over, leaps, and like his fingertips barely touch the frame. And he goes to sit down, and Coach Knight pulls out a 20 out of his wallet and pins it like 2 inches higher on the door frame. Says, all right, go run and see if you can touch that 20. If you can, it's yours. And he runs over, and the kid jumped 2 inches higher because he wanted the $20 bill. And Coach Knight said, coaching is all about motivation. And it was just this like aha moment that everybody was like, that's what you've been doing all these years with these national championships?
Paying
like,
your players?
Which is actually funny because he was the one guy who always said that he wasn't going to do that. And that's
Right.
part of what drove him from the sport, was feeling like too much cheating had gone on.
Yeah.
It's funny now to watch what's going on with the transfer portal and everything else. But to be at Indiana when he was there towards the end of his career, we weren't particularly good any of my 4 years, but this guy was a legend. And my senior year, my job after every IU home game was to basically sit at the front of the room right next to him and type out his quotes as he was saying them and then fax them to all the media outlets for anybody that wasn't there. And so just the idea, I can picture him standing right next to me right now. He had no clue who I was, but I will tell another funny story because it's really good. Years later, Tony La Russa gets him to come to spring training with the Diamondbacks. And so Coach Knight walked in. This is probably 2014, 15, something like that. And Coach Knight comes in and he's going to talk to the whole team of players, and he assembles, like, a lot of these guys knew who he was, but some of them are so young at this point, they just know he's an old basketball coach. They don't know much about him. Yeah. And so Tony introduces him. This is the guy that coached Michael Jordan in the '84 Olympics. And so somebody asked, Coach Knight, what was it like coaching the 1984 Olympic team? He says, I remember we were playing, and I can't remember the team. He said Lithuania or somebody that wasn't particularly good. He starts picking out players in the middle of the clubhouse. He's like, you stand right here, you right here, and you think he's going to do a drill in the middle of the clubhouse. And he says, you 5 guys could have beaten Lithuania. Sit down. and everybody just lost it. And he was such a good storyteller and such a imposing figure. I mean, for all the things that people know that he often gets criticized for, he also gave millions of dollars to the university library. He really was an incredibly well-read, very well-spoken person, very close friends with people like Ted Williams. They'd go fly fishing together. Yeah. And so I just think about the life that guy led and the impact he had on everybody around him is pretty cool.
When you were typing out his quotes, how often did you have to hit Shift 8 and use an asterisk?
Yeah, what's funny is I did have to type out all of the profanity. And I think, if I remember correctly, I left it in there. I was supposed to leave it in there and fax it out as it was and let the media outlets decide what to do with it.
That's funny. You went to Joe Torre baseball camp as a kid, and then years later you wound up working with him when he was manager of the Dodgers while you were there, like we talked about. So many people think that a manager doesn't really matter, and that if you assemble a good enough roster, it's a foregone conclusion that the team is going to be good, especially in today's day and age when so many situational matchups and decisions are predetermined through analytics. Having spent time around someone who's considered by some to be one of the greatest managers of the past 50 years and considered by others to have just been in the right place at the right time with an amazing roster, where do you kind of fall in that discussion? How much do you think managers matter in today's game?
I think they're incredibly critical, and right place, right time maybe plays a small piece of it. Sure, Dave Roberts has a great team right now and doesn't have to train Shohei Ohtani to do what he does, but managing personalities and managing workloads and managing the process it's incredibly important. And I don't just say that because I'm now in a role as essentially a manager and not as much of a doer as I once was. Joe was so good and remains so good at being a people person and understanding what goes into every organization. And I have this, like, the first week that he came to the Dodgers, he'd signed in November and we did the whole news conference and whatnot. But the first week of spring training, I remember we used to send back video clips to Los Angeles from Vero Beach. And it was like if the TV stations in LA couldn't come to Vero, they would get highlights from the day and a couple of sound bites. And so we're walking over to the interview session that night, and Joe says, what is this for again? And I explained it to him, and he said, okay, so then I shouldn't use Tony's name, the guy doing the interview. I shouldn't use Tony's name in my answer because it's going to go to all these other stations, right? And I'm like, what manager is thinking of that? Right. And he was as good at connecting with a clubhouse attendant or a stadium usher as he was with George Steinbrenner or Frank McCourt or myself or anybody else. He was incredible as a people person. And when you talk about doing media every day, I mean, I remember saying to Joe, probably a couple years into his managerial tenure, I said, I think you probably have spoken to the media more than any other human on the planet in the last 15 years, whatever it was, from 95 to 2011, to do it twice a day, every day in New York and Los Angeles. The president doesn't do it. The White House press secretary might be there for 4 years, but to do it that often and that well and give them what they need and show them respect, all that stuff, and then still win over and over and over. I mean, it's just to try to minimize what a manager does is crazy. I look at what Dave Roberts has done, and it is insane. This guy is the winningest all-time manager in the history of baseball. Yeah. And talk about winning percentage, there's nobody that's even close anymore.
Right. You've been a big advocate for the use of social media throughout your career. It's something that you've seen as a positive for a couple decades now. Forget teams using social media to grow their brands, which you would think would be a given at this point, but Do you think more individual players could benefit from having a social media team and a bigger individual presence online? Is that something Major League Baseball or the Players Association would even allow?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying very hard, actually. MLB has a kind of content creation group. They're working very hard to try to get players to be more social online. I think yes, there's no doubt you could benefit from having more players showing a little slice of their life. You see it in some of the other leagues. I think one of the biggest challenges is the other sports aren't an everyday thing. So when you're only playing 2 games a week or 1 game a week, you have all the other days of the week to just be sitting around and create content. Yeah. And it's interesting. I obviously have great respect for social media teams, but I think when you're an individual, you don't necessarily, you want to be authentic. And so if Mike Trout had a team of people doing his social, you'd be like, that's not Mike Trout.
But they could give a glimpse to the inner workings of his day, and even just showing people, how do you work out?
Yeah.
How do you get dressed?
Yeah. As long as it's authentic, I'd be all for it. And certainly, it's also hard. I recognize from years and years of talking to players and being around them that if you're Tom Cruise or whatever, you're an actor, and you went into this, you wanted to be on stage, you wanted to be famous, you wanted to be popular. If you're a baseball player, you wanted to play baseball. You wanted to win. But you didn't necessarily go into this because you want to deal with media and have your face and every piece of your life blasted out to the world. So I respect that there's a lot of players who say, I have zero interest in this thing. I just want to play. But I also think the way we can grow the game and the way we can get people excited about it is by showing them a little bit of what it's like. And I think baseball's gotten much, much better, certainly over the last decade and change. But it is a challenge when you're basically playing nonstop and every day is game day for you.
Yeah, totally. You were announced as the new president of the Hall of Fame in June of 2021 and assumed the role officially in September of that year. Before we talk about what your job is, let's talk about what your job is not. What is the number one misconception that people have about your title and position in particular?
Probably that I have something to do with who gets into the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
I mean, it's just not. I kind of figured that's where the question was going. I mean, every day I'm asked about people who aren't in the Hall of Fame, and some of them are obvious, and some of them are not. Some of them are sometimes people I've never heard of that they'll go, how come you can't? This guy from the 1800s absolutely belongs in there, or this non-player that may not understand that we don't put doctors or coaches or others. That this guy coached for 40 years in baseball. How is he not in the Hall of Fame? So I think just the idea that somehow I have a say in that is probably the biggest misperception.
Yeah. I know the answer to what does a typical day look like for you is there is no such thing as a typical day. But what are some of the duties that you consistently have in your role as the president of the Hall of Fame?
Well, certainly the actual administration of the Hall of Fame is a big piece of it, and it's why we are so popular, even though we are an incredible museum, and there are a ton of my duties, frankly, that people wouldn't realize go into museum affairs and things like curation and archives and library and things of that nature. At the same time, what we're known for is the plaque gallery, and so dealing with Hall of Famers, I think I spoke to a couple of them yesterday, and we're dealing with the January 21st announcement and all of the process that goes into that, and thinking about Hall of Fame weekend and everything that's going to go into what could be a really unique one this year. I'd say that's a big part of it. I'd say that running a 100-person plus institution, any president of any organization, there are so many administrative things, meetings and strategic planning and trying to think about what does the future look like. We are already starting to think about what could 26 and 27 and 28 look like, not just in terms of who the Hall of Fame class would be, but what's this museum going to look like and what might a theme be and how all those sorts of things that any other organization would have. And then I'd say a huge part of it is most people think we're run by MLB, and we're not. We're an independent, nonprofit organization that has to fundraise. And so
you like to work in conjunction with MLB. You like to be on their good side, but you are not owned by them, or things that you do are not dictated by MLB, correct?
Correct. And we have 4 owners and the commissioner on our board of directors, as well as 6 or 7 Hall of Famers. So, I mean, you've got a lot of influence, certainly, in what we collect and talk about is very heavily MLB, but we also have exhibits on women in baseball that have nothing to do with MLB and Latin America, and obviously the current one that we may get into about Yaku baseball, the Trans-Pacific exchange between Japan and the U.S. Only part of that is the U.S. piece of it. It's collegiate tours, and it's tours that people made of Japan. And so it's the game of baseball from the earliest days to today. And I think MLB is an incredible partner. They do so many awesome things for us. I cannot say enough good things about what they've done for us over the years. but it is very different when they don't own us and they don't fund us. We're on the end of the year right now, and so we just sent out our annual plea to our members and donors. Like, if you want to help preserve the history of the game, now's the time where you can make a donation. That's a big part of what we do too, is development.
Yeah. Am I right that the Hall of Fame is kind of three different branches, where it's the Hall of Famers and the people who are in the plaque gallery, and then there's the museum with the artifacts, and then kind of like the archives and the research library? Like, those are three kind of separate arms, all working under the same umbrella, but they are kind of separate though, right?
Well, they all do separate things. It's interesting you put it that way, because one of the things that Rob Manfred tried to do when he came in as commissioner was this idea of one baseball, like MLB Network and MLB.com and MLB were three different arms. And he thought, how can we make all these people work together? I think that's the same thing. We don't want to see each other as separate arms. We want to all work together, but certainly the Hall of Fame is in fact very different than the museum and the archives and the collection process and building exhibits and researchers who come to the library 360 days a year to come write baseball books and just want to learn more about the history of baseball. So I like to think of us all as one giant institution, but they're certainly very, very different functions.
Mm-hmm. When was the first time that you visited the Hall of Fame? Had you been to Cooperstown before this job was on your radar?
Yeah, so I came here in 2001, actually. Oddly enough, my niece, who's staying with me right now and is 23 years old, she was born in Manhattan, and so I came out to see her a week after she was born, and I came up with my dad for the day to look at Cooperstown. So it's been 23 years since I was first up here. And then I was fortunate to come back. I loved it. I mean, I should say that, I mean, for every baseball fan who you grow up imagining what the Hall of Fame is going to be, it was just unreal. I can picture a lot of things that now are part of my daily life that I remember driving by the lake and being like, wow, look at this thing. Like, that was in 2001. And then I came back in 2014. I had intended to come be here for Joe Torre when he got inducted. And just, again, like you mentioned, having grown up around his camp and worked with him, I wanted to support him. But about 6 weeks before that induction, Tony La Russa got hired as our chief baseball officer at the Diamondbacks. So I really kind of came with both of them. And I was getting eyes on what the process was going to be like the next year when Randy Johnson got in, because we were going to be responsible as one of the teams for throwing parties and really kind of promoting all the things surrounding Randy's induction. So those 3 times were the only 3 times, 2001, 2014, and 2015, that I was here before I actually came for my interview.
Now that you have the role that you have here, your induction weekend experience is a little bit different than everyone else's. What's your favorite thing about induction weekend now that you're such an important part of the operation?
Well, it's 2 things. One, I absolutely love watching the staff and the town come together to put it on. Like, there's so many things that would not mean anything to a visitor, but when I get this crazy job of sitting on the stage with these guys, and so I'm looking out over the crowd, and I can see the person in our library handing out waters up and down the aisles, and I can see the staff moving chairs and selling merch and all, just so many things that it does not make any sense that this town of 1,600 people can put on an event for anywhere between 10 and 80,000 people. It's insane to watch it come together. So truly my favorite part of it is knowing all the little things and watching them happen. And then I'd say the answer that probably any baseball fan would want to hear is the Sunday night dinner that I'm in is just, it's nuts. I don't feel like I belong in there. I think I'm in there because it's been the tradition that myself and the commissioner are in the room with the Hall of Famers. But the idea that I'm hosting a dinner for the living Hall of Famers, and then I just sit there and get to watch. I just be a fly on the wall. I obviously don't add anything to the room. I'm often at the table with the managers and GMs. You've probably heard people talk about there's the Punch and Judy table, and there's the pitchers table, and the 500 home run hitters table. I often find myself near Joe Torre or Bud Selig or John Sherholz, Pat Gillick. Those are the guys that I like to just quietly just watch what goes on. It's an incredible, cool thing for a baseball fan.
If there was one induction ceremony that you could go back and witness in person, which class would you wish you had a time machine to go back and see for yourself?
Wow. Man, I've never thought of that before. I would say 2 come to mind. Certainly the first one. I mean, the idea, when you live in Cooperstown and you hear people talk about, we actually have a friend who lives in what used to be the train station here. Cool. They turned it into a house. And so they explained how this is literally where Babe Ruth and Tiger, these guys took a train, got out here in our house, and then walked down Main Street back in 1939. To actually witness that would have been the coolest thing in the world. Now, at the time, you wouldn't have realized how cool it is. It would have just been something that happened in Cooperstown that day. And then watching Jackie get inducted would have been really, really, really cool. I would have loved that. Those are probably the two that come to mind. But I mean, what's neat about them is they're all really unique. And so sometimes the best speeches come from somebody you wouldn't necessarily say is the biggest name in baseball, but you go back, and I just recently watched Brooks Robinson's speech after he passed away. His family was kind enough to make a donation to the hall, and I had sent a thank you note to his son, and he said, take a look at my dad's. If you haven't watched it recently, take a look at my dad's speech. And he talked about wanting to make an impact on the world around him and the game of baseball off the field. And this guy lived much longer as a non-major leaguer than he did as a major leaguer, and absolutely had that impact. And so, I mean, I would have loved to have stood there and watched that. And the induction used to take place literally, and I'm staring at the space right now behind you that is where induction used to take place, Cooper Park. I would have loved to have seen one of those 30 years ago. So, I mean, it's an amazing place, and that weekend is just one of the most special times in baseball.
Yeah. Did Jeff Idelson give you any, I don't want to call them warnings, but what did he say to try to prepare you for the things that there's no way that you could prepare for, like being one of the only 9 members in the Hall of Fame on the stage at induction weekend, things like that?
Well, I mean, Jeff, I give him a lot of credit. I remember the first breakfast we had to talk about this. He came out to spring training, and I just was peppering him with questions about life in Cooperstown and raising a family here and what it's like working in a slower pace than what MLB is like after 27 years of doing that. He was awesome. I mean, he really gave me answers to everything and was very honest about it, because I think the last thing he wanted was somebody that was going to come here and then hate it and leave. Yeah. So, I mean, I laugh about this, but I remember him saying, it's hard to find good dry cleaning in Cooperstown. Like, as stupid as that sounds, like, they're not actually doing it on site. They send it off, and so he's like, and so it would often come back with a bad button or something. And I just kind of chuckled. But even to that level of, like, what life is like in Cooperstown and what this job is like, I felt very prepared. And so people ask me all the time, what's it like? And the answer often is, it's exactly what I thought it was going to be. I think I had a pretty good idea of what I was coming for, the good, the bad, the ugly, and it's certainly a lot more good than anything else. It's just an incredible role and amazing place to live.
What is something about your job that has surprised you, whether it's one of your many duties or something else?
That surprised me? That's a really interesting question. I haven't really thought about. I guess as a non-museum professional before I got into this, I don't think I realized how much goes into making an exhibit. There's countless hours of, obviously, research. I mean, I knew that you don't just take a bunch of artifacts, stick them up, and call them things, but like the amount of time and energy that went into creating Souls of the Game, and that's going into Yaku Baseball right now, and even a smaller case, Savannah Bananas, that we did, it's not just grabbing 10 artifacts and putting labels up. It's really thinking about what is the visitor experience like, and how can we engage the visitor, teach them something without making them feel like they're in school. How can we run a museum to the standards that we expect a museum to be held to, and the collection care that goes into it, the way the artifacts are handled and transported around the museum, all of that stuff. I don't know if I'd say it surprised me as much as I just didn't know anything about it. Yeah. And so I remember early on, Tim Mead, my predecessor, saying to me, you know, if you're going to interview for this, you should definitely talk about understanding that there's the Hall of Fame and museum. It is not just the Hall of Fame. And if you go there thinking you're just going to run the Hall of Fame, you're not. You're in charge of a museum. And for somebody who never had museum experience, that was a little daunting. But I feel like I've spent a lot of time trying to learn how it goes and understand it and dive into it.
Yeah. You talk to Hall of Famers basically every single day in some capacity. How often do you take a step back and just think to yourself how insane that is?
Probably every time, honestly. Every time I get a holiday card or a call or something from somebody who's in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I'm fortunate to consider many of them my friends, so I suppose that at some point when the phone rings, I sometimes just take it and don't think like, oh, this is so-and-so. But I would say that more often than not, I'm very, very aware on a daily basis of how insane it is that I'm doing this for a living, and that these are the greatest people that ever played the sport that I've loved since I was a baby. And like, it is, it's really just, it's a very unique role. There's nothing else like it in baseball. It's different than being a club president. It's different than being certainly the commissioner. I mean, it's a nonprofit job that gets to work with the greatest people that ever played the game of baseball. And it's not just Hall of Famers. I mean, we have all summer long people coming here, usually recently retired players whose kids are now playing in one of the tournaments in town here. And so, I mean, we just had Chris Sale recently here. When he was injured, he came during the All-Star break 2 years ago and brought his kids' team. And CeCe Sabathia was here, and all these other incredible players who, whether they played a day in the big leagues or 20 years and are Hall of Famers, these are the absolute best of the game that I love. And that's just it's really cool with umpires and broadcasters. People are constantly rolling through here, and that's never lost on me.
I've heard stories that during Ichiro's playing career, he was the active player who visited the Hall of Fame the most. Who is the current active player who is here more often than anyone else?
Honestly, we really don't have anybody that's come more than once since I've been here. We've had active guys come, but Ichiro is incredibly unique in that regard. There's just not a lot of people that when they're done playing 162 games and traveling as much as they travel, most of them just want to go to their hometown and not travel and be around their kids and take their kids to school and all that. So, I mean, we've definitely had guys come here in the off season. And like I said, Chris Sale, I think, is the only active guy I can think of who came during the year because he was hurt. But we just don't have guys coming. And I don't think that that's a knock on them. I just think
right, of course,
most people aren't like, hey, how can I spend every offseason in Cooperstown?
And I think that tells you what type of person Ichiro was.
It absolutely does. He has a understanding and a respect for the history of the game that is just incredible. And I think Jeff Idelson told me that when he first gave over his first artifact, he didn't really understand what it was that he was giving it to. And then when he came here, Ichiro, I'm talking about, came here and saw the care we use and the way in which we treat these incredible objects, that's when he went, I want you guys to have anything you ever want. Just tell me and it's yours. And so we have this amazing collection of Ichiro artifacts from all these great moments. And nowadays, certainly, even back then, I mean, these are worth a lot of money if we, obviously we don't ever sell anything, but if a player chose, I'd rather hang on to this and sell it, or give it to my cousin so they can sell it and have it but I think that there's an understanding amongst the players who play that this is a way that you can live forever. I'm giving you this thing and you're going to look after it for eternity, and my great grandkids are going to be able to come around here and see this thing, and it's going to be in the same condition as it was when I gave it to you in 2024. And I think that's a really cool thing that the current player realizes.
And I think there's a difference. I just did some research recently on Mickey Mantle, one of the inner circle Hall of Fame guys when he retired. In his playing career, he made $1.2 million total as one of the greatest players who ever lived.
That even sounds high to me. I wouldn't have thought it was that much.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I think players from that generation, maybe they'd want to hold on to stuff and sell it because they needed some extra money. We were players today, if you're making $700 million, not everybody's got the Shohei contract, but everybody's making a decent amount of money. Maybe you don't need to sell your batting gloves on eBay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you think about those players back in the day, it was because of them understanding. Babe Ruth early on giving us his entire collection, and Lou Gehrig giving us, his family giving us his entire collection. Eventually, Tom Seaver giving us his entire collection. Hank Aaron is another one that ultimately decided, I'm going to give you everything I have. And you think about just what an unbelievable gesture that was. It makes it so that when you go to, I don't know who, at the end of the World Series, I walk in and I ask a player for their jersey or their bat or their glove. The people that came before them allowed them to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And I think if we were starting the Hall of Fame in 2024, it would be much harder to ask them to hand us something that could be worth a lot of money. But I think there's an understanding of what this place is and what it does that is very unique, and it makes them want to be a part of it, especially if they're not a Hall of Fame player. They might not have the $700 million contract, but Anthony Bondo, when I went to him after the World Series, who I'd known since his big league debut, and said, hey, would you let us have your jersey? I mean, the joy that he had in giving us his jersey, and when he heard that it was up, texted and asked, can I see a photo of it? And like all these incredible things, he is going to live on forever in here. And his great-grandkids are going to get to come in someday and say, can I see great-grandpa Anthony's jersey from that World Series 100 years ago?
Right.
And it's going to be here for them to look at.
Yeah. You kind of touched on this earlier, but when people say working in baseball, they usually assume that means working for one of the teams or maybe for a broadcasting partner. But working at the Hall of Fame is absolutely working in baseball. Why don't more people make that connection and think of the Hall of Fame as a potential career in the game?
I wish I knew the answer to that. It's one of the things I'm trying very hard to figure out. How do we get people to recognize what a special place this is to live and work? I'm sure some of it is the remoteness of it. I remember what I first thought when this opportunity came was, am I really going to move to Cooperstown? Like, I don't think I really realized until I started doing my due diligence that what a viable option that is as a place to work. So it's funny, over the last few years, I've tried very hard to spread the word within the baseball community. It's why my Twitter/X account is as much about life in Cooperstown as it is about the Hall of Fame. I want the people in the industry to see that and go, my kids can go to school there and have a great life, and my spouse can live here and have a great job, and there's all these other things that happen in the winter. I think people think we just like hibernate and lock down, but there's a ton of stuff going on this weekend in Cooperstown that is just an amazing place to live and work, and I don't know why we at the teams don't spend time thinking about that. It's just never been a thing I've thought much of until the opportunity was presented to me.
In one of my previous episodes, I spoke with Brian Bernardoni, who's the official historian of Wrigley Field. He said one of his favorite things about working at Wrigley is being there when no one else is, and then watching the ballpark come to life as people start to file in. Is there some place within the Hall of Fame that you like to spend time when no one else is here?
Yeah, I would certainly say that the Plaque Gallery, when you come in before it's open or here after it closes, I mean, it is what people describe, where you can feel, call it the ghosts, the history, whatever it is. There's a sensation in that room that quite often when I come in the morning, we tend to tell people to start their journey on the second floor. And so even if you're a fan or a visitor who comes at 9 and you go to the Plaque Gallery first, you often have it almost to yourself, even if there's hundreds or thousands of people here, because they're all starting the museum on the second and third floor. I mean, that I think is a really, really cool experience, that you just think of this hallowed ground and you're getting to stand in there by yourself. It never gets old. I mean, right now we've got a Christmas tree in there, and it just feels like, man, you talk about, this town is a Hallmark movie set. It just doesn't, it is, we're incredibly blessed to have a place like this in America, and then to live here and work here is next level.
Has being the president of the Hall of Fame changed the way you previously felt about certain players or what it means to be a Hall of Famer?
I think only in the sense that there were definitely people that before I got here, I was not a big person who like tracked every stat or tried to figure out who was going in or who wasn't. It just wasn't part of, I always watched the induction ceremonies. It was on in the clubhouse, whatever team I was at in late July. But there's a lot of guys that either were inducted before I got here or who have been inducted since that I may not have necessarily understood how good they were, because I really didn't dive that deep into, okay, at the end of 18 years, how did this person's career numbers end up? And so I think just in terms of what is a Hall of Famer, I mean, ultimately it is the top 1% of anyone who's ever played the game. My boss, Jane Forbes-Clark, she loves that number. She's like, I don't ever want it to be more than 1%. There are Halls of Fame where they let in the top 4% or 8%, or every year we induct the next 8 best players that aren't in. Mm-hmm. We are very much about wanting to be the absolute best of the best. And I think we can do that because even if you're not in the Plaque Gallery, you're represented somewhere else in the museum. So it's not like the greatest 2 or 3% aren't there. And that's been the thing that, again, that 1% number I knew nothing about before I got here. I might have said it was 5%. I would have had no real idea, but I knew it was the best of the best. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, you just look at some of these people and what they've done over their careers. And what I also think is really cool is that they're Hall of Fame people. There's something that humbles you once you get elected and then inducted here. They're just great people. And there's nobody I don't enjoy dealing with because there's a level of humility that accompanies being put into that Plaque Gallery.
How exactly are the Hall of Fame voters chosen? Like, who decides who are going to be the people who decide who gets to be in the Hall of Fame?
Well, there's the two processes. So the BBWAA process, you have to have covered a major league team pretty much regularly for 10 years. So if you're in the chapter, your local baseball writers chapter for 10 years and you're covering baseball regularly, not like I go to a game, a homestand, but you are regularly covering baseball for 10 years, you earn your vote. And that's not something that anybody decides other than essentially the sports editor of your paper decides who they're going to send out to the ballpark on a regular basis. And so you keep that vote as long as you stay active, and then once you're no longer active for 10 years, if you've retired and you're just kind of hanging out and you're not watching baseball anymore, eventually we kind of take people off the rolls. But it's about 400 baseball writers who get that privilege. And then the era committee process is completely separate. That's the one that happens every December. It's 16 people, usually somewhere in the range of 6 or 7 Hall of Famers, 6 or 7 executives, and 3 or 4 historians who are put in a room. And we look for people who have unimpeachable careers that you just look and you say, this general manager has won multiple World Series, or this Hall of Famer or this historian brings something to the room. In the most recent one that we just had this month, we had 2 Negro Leagues historians because we had 2 Negro Leagues players or pre-Negro Leaguers on the ballot, and we wanted to make sure that their perspective was brought into the room as well. So you bring people that you hope are going to contribute to that room. And it's really cool. It's 16 people who, when you look at it, I don't think anybody's going, how is that person a voter? And we're very open about it. There are certainly Halls of Fame that don't tell you how you get in or who the people are. we want people to look at it and break it down and say, hey, that's a fair cross-section of baseball in all sorts of ways, American League, National League, age, every sort of way you can look at a voter. We want you to say that perspective was in the room and gets shared. And it's a crazy simple process. Like literally the name comes up, everybody talks about them and why they should or shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, and they move on to the next person, and then they vote. Mm-hmm. And I think there's this like belief that there's some like backroom shadiness that's going on, or that people are trying to, you vote for my guy and I'll vote for yours. Like it just doesn't happen. I've now watched it 5 times. It's as simple as names come up, everybody talks about them, and you can vote for 3 out of the 8 people on the ballot. It used to be 4 out of 10, but it's really pretty simple process, and that's how we get to the electees.
When those discussions are happening in the room, are the arguments stronger for a player or against a player? Like, is somebody more passionate that this guy needs to be in, or is somebody more passionate we cannot put this person in?
It is a very fair question, but one of the things we tell people the second they walk in the room is that we don't talk about what goes on in that room, because then it allows, it stops the candor. So as much as I'd love to share that, I cannot tell you one way or another. Very
fair. I know this isn't really up to you, but are you a big hall guy or a small hall guy?
I guess it just depends. I mean, I'm a 1%. I love that we are seen the way we are, that we're held to a different standard. So, I mean, I don't know whether that, as the annals of baseball, we're going to have more and more people, and I believe that the top 1% belong in the Hall of Fame. And but I guess I should also say what I think doesn't really matter. I mean, ultimately, I answer to the board, and the board, I mean, they all of our jobs, I guess, is just to look out for this institution that's been around for 85 years and is going to be around way beyond any of our lives. And so my own personal opinions pretty much never come into what goes on here. I think we just want people to revere this place the way that it's been revered for 8.5 decades.
Yeah. Through the elections of 2024, a total of 346 people have been inducted into the Hall of Fame, including 274 players, 39 executives or pioneers, 23 managers, and 10 umpires. I used to run the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum, and a controversial take I've always held is that it's better for Joe's popularity if he isn't in the Hall of Fame. Because if you look at his contemporaries like Napoleon Lajoie or Tris Speaker or Sam Crawford, guys who were rightfully inducted into the Hall of Fame after their careers ended because at the time of their retirement, they were considered some of the best players of all time. Well, now here we are 100 years after they played the game, and most serious baseball fans can't really tell you anything about those guys, and most casual fans have never even heard their names. I think one of the things that keeps Joe's name in the public consciousness after all these years is that people think he belongs in the Hall and isn't in. So every year his name gets brought up as someone who's deserving of a plaque but doesn't have one, whereas the guys who deserve plaques and got them, there's really nothing left to talk about for them. There's a book called Ghosts in the Gallery at Cooperstown by David Fleitz that discusses this concept that just because you're enshrined at the Hall of Fame, that it's not a guarantee of lasting name recognition because the sport's history just stretches too far back, and eventually someone is going to come along and break the records that those first few generations set. And despite having a plaque in the gallery, some guys who are in the Hall of Fame are still going to largely be forgotten. Obviously, guys like Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and Cy Young, the inner circle guys, they have things all over. But for some of the now lesser-known inductees, besides having their plaques in the gallery, is there an attempt or a focus on having artifacts from each of the actual enshrined Hall of Famers on display at the museum?
It's a fair question, but there isn't because, first of all, I mean, we have nearly 40,000 artifacts and only 10% can really be on display at any given time. We have only so much space here. So part of what I think is also important is that this institution isn't just about the Hall of Famers. Yes, that is a major, major part of it, but we are trying to tell the story of those who aren't enshrined as well. And so if you had to take 350 artifacts from first of all, even finding artifacts from many of the inductees would be incredibly hard to find.
19th century guys.
Yeah, there's a ton of people we don't have for, but I would say a very large number of them certainly are represented in one of the exhibits around the game. And maybe it's not an artifact, but it's a photo or a document in the library. I mean, we do our best to try to collect something for these people. But no, I wouldn't say we make an effort to try to put Hall of Famers in exhibits more than any others. We try to tell the best story that this exhibit needs to share.
And guys like Shoeless Joe or Barry Bonds, they might not have plaques, but their pictures, their artifacts, their stories are all over this museum as well. Do you know what single player is most represented in the Hall of Fame's collection?
Well, I'd say it's either Ruth or Aaron. It's probably Hank Aaron because he gave us his whole collection. Yeah. And we have a lot of we have an entire gallery focused on his life and times, and we also have a gallery focused on Babe Ruth's life and times. but it's far less artifact heavy and more the way it's told is kind of through faux newspaper clippings of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, those two guys, they're the only two who have exhibits that focus just on them because they really transcended baseball in a way that's different than most. But in terms of others, I mean, like I mentioned, there have been other people who have given us their full collection that obviously those are the people that we have the most because they basically handed over
everything,
50 to 100. I mean, the Aaron collection is mind-blowing what we have. And I think and we just recently dedicated a statue and his widow Billy was here. And that was just an amazing part of the Memorial Day weekend last year that I think everybody that was a part of it is going to remember for a long time.
When something like 2024 happens, when the Negro League statistics were incorporated into the white Major League record books, and Josh Gibson now suddenly became the all-time career batting average leader, and lots of the top 10 lists of career totals and statistics changed, how does the Hall of Fame deal with that? Like, how quickly are displays within the museum changed to reflect the new, true records? And is there an effort to put more artifacts of displays of players like Oscar Charleston, Judd Wilson, Turkey Stearns, who are now officially recognized as some of the greatest players of all time?
Yeah, that has been an effort even before MLB made its decision that it made. When we were creating Souls of the Game, a lot of what we wanted to accomplish was not to just have one exhibit that focuses on the black baseball experience, but that we would update elements throughout the whole museum, even going back to the 1800s room. It's called Taking the Field, the earliest days of baseball. We made sure that new photos and artifacts got added there. We just put in a couple of new storylines in our timeline that's been there for 30 years and numerous other, we refer to them internally as the arteries, that the Souls of the Game is the heartbeat exhibit, and these are arteries around the museum that we wanted to update to make sure that those stories get told. So, I mean, it absolutely has been a focal point, but from a statistical standpoint, when you talk about records, I think we're lucky that, or maybe I'd say that the people who built the one for the books, our exhibit on records, had the foresight that a lot of the records are done digitally. So the fact that like Baseball Reference updates it and boom, it's ready to roll.
On a touch screen that you can interact with.
Exactly. Yeah. So that we're fortunate, but when it comes to labels that have to be printed and updated throughout the museum, that takes much longer. And I would say we still have more to do. But it's on our task list, and I think will continue to happen. And every time we start a new exhibit or work on something, we're always updating those numbers. But we will not update plaques. That's one of the things we really don't do is change plaques. So Willie Mays is going to always have 10 less hits on his plaque than he does in the one for the books exhibit, and that's okay. Yeah. Not a big deal.
Like you said, there's about 40,000 artifacts in the Hall of Fame's collection. About 10% of those are above ground, meaning roughly 4,000 are on display, and then 36,000 are not. It's great to know that so much baseball history is preserved, but it's a shame that so much of it is unseen. Even a large number of the things on display within the museum, primarily when it comes to ephemera, aren't the actual items. They're facsimiles that have been reproduced from the originals which are in the archives. How does the Hall of Fame approach not letting the 90% of items that are not on display kind of become forgotten?
Well, the biggest thing is that it's a rotation. There's always stuff coming. I mean, probably every week I get an email from our museum team that says, yesterday it was this Piazza jersey went down and this, I can't remember what jersey went in that play, but there's all year long, I have hundreds of artifacts going up and coming down in a lot of ways because they have to rest. I mean, museum people understand that. I think the rule of thumb is for every year something is on exhibit, it needs 3 years not out in the light and exposed to the other elements that exist upstairs. So at the end of the day, I don't think we're different from any other museum in that there's probably more downstairs than upstairs, but I think it's sharing things on social media. It's making sure that our collection is accessible and to people that just want to know what's there. When someone comes to our library and says, hey, can you pull me a list of everything you have from Shoeless Joe? We can pull up a list. And quite often, if it's a researcher or somebody who needs to see that thing or that document, we bring it right to them in the library. So I don't worry too much that the stuff downstairs is going to be forgotten because I think it's often coming upstairs and it's often getting changed out. And most importantly, when we tell people we're bringing it in, we tell them we're going to preserve it. So we do have to hold ourselves to that standard.
Totally. I've got a small collection of photos of the Hall of Fame, and it's very interesting to go back and look at what the interior used to look like, how things were set up, what pieces were on display from decades past, things like that. It seems like for the first few decades, the museum was solely, here are the artifacts from the retired greats of the game or players who have passed away, or here we recognize and honor the great teams from years gone by. And of course, the hall still has an enormous amount of space dedicated to those types of things, but it seems like in recent years, there's much more attention paid to current players and amazing feats, like having the glove of a pitcher who recently threw a no-hitter, or the bat from a player who recently hit for the cycle, even if those players aren't necessarily on a Hall of Fame trajectory for their own career like you talked about. When the leadership of the Hall of Fame has discussions about what is more important, teaching and honoring the history of the game, or being a museum that engages with young people by showing them current players and teams that they're already familiar with, How do those conversations go?
It's an interesting way you ask the question, because I wouldn't say we ever have the discussion what's more important. The reality is I think we recognize the importance of both sides of it, but a lot of what we've tried to do over the last 3 years is make sure that the museum stays relevant for the next generation of fans. And I think that as 12-year-old kids roll in here, yes, you want to be able to teach them about the 1800s and the early 1900s. And even, I think about the guys that I thought were Mickey Mantle and Stan Musial. Like, they seemed old to me. They're 40, 50 years old. It doesn't mean that they're not important and they're represented everywhere. But I think it's important for 12-year-olds to look and say, the 80s are to them what the 50s were to me.
Yes.
The 2010s are a decade old. So, history happened last night, and that's the sort of thing that we try to remind ourselves all the time. We are a living, breathing institution, and when something big happens on the field in modern times, and that's not just MLB. When Roki Sasaki threw a perfect game in Japan a couple years ago, we got his a baseball from his, I think it was a baseball, might have been a cap or jersey. I should know that. But we asked his NPB team to send that to us. So we're always looking for those things, and we want them to be able to go on display quick enough that when a fan is walking around, like, how amazing is that if somebody comes in and a week after the Wade Miley no-hitter, they can be like, check that out. There's the jacket that just came in from Wade last night. Yeah. It's hard to do because it is a process that involves condition reports and photographing and the accessioning process and all these things that make a museum a museum. But I would say that we work very hard to make sure that the modern story is being told as much as the older stories.
I know people who have never been to the Hall of Fame or haven't been here in years give you guys a lot of flack about this, but I actually think the Hall does a good job now of addressing the Doubleday myth and acknowledging that it has been debunked. While the field in Cooperstown is still called Doubleday, I think it's fair to say that the Hall is definitely no longer claiming Abner Doubleday invented baseball or even hitching their wagon to his name or the stories associated with him. But now here we are 85 years after the first induction ceremony, and despite the original placement of the Hall of Fame being in Cooperstown under kind of false pretenses, there's now nearly a century of legitimate history right here in town. When you call Cooperstown the spiritual home of baseball, what do you mean by that, and why do you think it's important to have a place like Cooperstown for people to gather?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that you're saying what you're saying, because I do think we try to make it a point not to perpetuate the myth. We try to make it very clear that we don't believe baseball was created here. But I think baseball was probably created in a town not much unlike Cooperstown, and so it becomes a spiritual home, both because if you want to imagine what a field might have looked like in the early 1800s where the game of baseball became baseball, like, I think it could have been a town just like this. To your point, 9 decades basically of baseball history have been going on here, and if you go back 9 decades before that, essentially more baseball has happened here than it did before here. So I just think that it is important for there to be a pilgrimage site like this. Our board, our chairman of the board, everybody that thinks about why we're here, I think we all tend to agree that, like, this is the perfect place for baseball to be celebrated on a daily basis. The staff, nobody here is trying to perpetuate any myth, and Doubleday Field is owned by the village of Cooperstown. They make it very clear on the signage around town that nobody's pretending like baseball was created in that field. But it's actually part of the history and lore of the country that some guy thought it was. Some guy claimed that Doubleday taught him baseball, 100 yards from where we're sitting right now.
And that he had the ball.
Exactly. And we have that baseball that they found in, I think, Fly Creek. So, there's obviously a reason why we were put here. And I think ignoring that would be weird. And I give this place a lot of credit for admitting, I think a couple decades ago now, that nobody's pretending anymore like this is where it was started. But we also don't know where it was started. I think it'd be different if you had very clear evidence that said it was started on this borough on this day. Yeah. But nobody really knows, so why not? Why couldn't it be here, and why shouldn't this be the spiritual home of baseball?
Sometimes the Hall of Fame has a representative physically at a baseball game, whether it's you personally or someone else. And a lot of those instances are games where you know ahead of time that there's going to be a historic event happening in some way, like the first game at a new stadium, the last game at a stadium before a team leaves to play somewhere else, World Series games, or when the Savannah Bananas played in Cooperstown. In those instances, what are the conversations that the Hall has in-house and then with the teams in advance to be like, here are some of the artifacts we'd love to take back to the Hall with us?
Well, often it comes down to how can you best tell that story. And so a conversation will be had, let's pick the World Series. We'll know we're going to be on site, and we'll have a conversation before we go, okay, what are the storylines going into it? And so, back when the Braves were in it, like, the pearls were a thing that everybody knew was a thing, and we debated, should we ask Jock Peterson for his pearls? Or then there's also times where on the fly something is happening there and you have to be able to adjust. So, I mean, when it comes down to the conversations, there are several that happen in-house here, and then we will reach out to the teams. Usually, again, there's so many superstitious people in baseball, you have to be very careful not to be asking. And so we're always very, very careful not to make assumptions or make them feel like we've jinxed their team. But we do have to say, hey, listen, this is the normal process that we go, and we're sending both teams the same message that if this were to happen, these are the sorts of things we might look to ask, because every team is different in the way they handle artifacts. In some teams, you could just go straight to the clubhouse manager. Some teams, it's direct to the players. Some teams, it's to the PR person. Some teams, it's to senior leadership of the team. And so you kind of start with, hey, if these are the 6 or 7 things we're looking to collect from this World Series, who should we ask and how would you like us to go about it? And so we try to be really respectful, because it's not... People always say, like, so you go there and you take this stuff? And I'm like, no, we don't take anything. We ask. We ask, and we try to make it clear how grateful we are when people donate.
One of the great things about baseball, though, is that you never know when an otherwise seemingly insignificant game might be historic. So how's it handled when a random pitcher of the White Sox throws a no-hitter on a Wednesday in April and you can't possibly know ahead of time that something significant was going to happen? Like, at what point during a game does the bat phone ring when something historic is happening in a game where you guys don't have a representative there? Like, let's say a pitcher's got a perfect game through 5 innings. Are you starting to reach out to somebody that early to be like, hey, if something happens, we'd love this and this and this? Or does every team kind of understand at this point that the Hall of Fame is always going to want stuff? You don't even need to remind them.
Well, I love that you use the White Sox example, so I'll use that. I know you're a White Sox fan. There you go.
Not to throw them under the bus, but like one of the White Sox pitchers that threw a no-hitter probably wouldn't have had anything else in this building at some point, you know? So
yeah, it's fair. So, I mean, the reality is, yes, teams know that if a no-hitter or a 4-homer game or some crazy thing happens, that we're likely to come calling, but we certainly don't rely on them to be like, I wonder if we should send something. The reality is that I'll use Burley's perfect game, for example. Like I think we have his hat, but we also have the glove from the amazing catch that saved the perfect game.
Yeah.
You can't know that glove is going to be needed until literally it happens. Right. So we have a tremendous relationship with the 30 clubs from from ownership to presidents to GMs, and then often to the public relations person who we're calling in the moment. I wouldn't say the 5th inning of a perfect game, but by the 6th inning of a major event, there's a group of us talking about it internally. And then it's really towards the end of the game. There's nothing that a PR person can do in the 6th inning to help us get an artifact. The game's going on. So it's not until really late in the game, or often right at the last out, we will send something saying, hey, we'd like to reach out, and would you please ask so-and-so if they'd be willing to donate, this sort of thing.
Many people's only experience with Cooperstown is coming one time during an induction weekend to see their favorite player from their favorite team give a speech. But Cooperstown during an induction weekend is a much, much different place than it is during the rest of the summer, let alone living here full-time and dealing with winters and everything that comes along with that. One of my favorite things about following you on social media is the way that you show everyday life here in Cooperstown. For someone who's never been to the Hall of Fame, make the pitch for them to come and tell them, in your opinion, what is the best time of year to make that trip?
Well, the second question is the easier one to answer. I actually think for true baseball fans, coming multiple times at different times is the way to do it. Yeah. I do think seeing induction is something that every baseball fan should see, but fall here is like, it's just gorgeous. It's insane how nice it is. And in the winter, you can have the place, not to yourself, but pretty darn, I mean, right now it's pretty quiet around here. And
that's why I'm here this week.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just enough snow outside right now to be absolutely gorgeous, but have no impact on travel or anybody's life. And so I think for a baseball fan, the reality is there isn't a best time to come. The best time to come is as soon as you can, because I think so many people have this thing on their bucket list. And when I got here, I started saying, like, take it off your bucket list and put it on your to-do list. Like, the people, to answer your question, what would be my best way to sell it? When people come, it always lives up to their expectations, and usually it exceeds it. And when you're talking about something that people have wanted to do forever, it's hard to actually exceed someone's expectations. Yeah. Usually you build it up so much in your mind and it doesn't actually live up to it. And the number of people who come here and say, I've waited my whole life to come here and I wish I had come earlier because I'd come again, or I can't believe it actually lived up to what I always imagined it would be. And part of it is also because the town itself is such an amazing place. Yes, this institution is off the charts special, and it's the reason most people come to this town. But we have this ridiculous golf course 100 yards from here that's the number 2 public course in New York that's right along the lake. We've got this amazing lake that you can take a boat out on and have an amazing day on the water. We've got other museums. We've got great restaurants and shopping and hikes. And there's one of the oldest mansions in America is right up the top of the lake. Like, all these incredible things that you could go see and do, whether you love baseball or not. And frankly, for the people who don't love baseball, I think if you just understand the role it played in America, coming here is just as cool for you as well.
There have been thousands of books written about Hall of Famers and hundreds of books written about the Hall of Fame itself. A book like The Politics of Glory is great, and a lot of it still rings true, but at this point, it's 30 years out of date. Is there a particular book that you like to recommend to people to give them the insight about the actual Hall of Fame, whether it's about the history of the museum or the inner workings and behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on here to make an operation like this run?
Oh, man, I wish there was, to be honest with you. I've actually said recently that it's time for another book to be written on the history of the Hall. We're closing in. I mean, we're 15 years away, but that happens fast. Like, I think at the time that we get to 100, I'm sure the Hall will do something that tells our history because we've got the most unbelievable documentation of all board meetings and all the crazy cool things that have happened here. We have a ton of employees who have worked here for 30 plus years. We actually have one retiring on Tuesday after multiple decades. And so it just, the institutional knowledge here needs to be put down on paper somewhere so that 100 years from now, people can look back and say, what were the first 100 years of the Hall like? But there has not been, to my understanding, anything in recent years that really tells the story of this institution. And I certainly am looking forward to whenever that time comes that it does exist.
How can people follow the Hall of Fame on social media and stay up to date with what's going on here on a day-to-day basis?
The easiest way, obviously, is through every social platform that exists. We are pretty much on all of them, and we've just built out a content department that's doing an awesome job of creating more video and helping, like you mentioned before, take some of the things that are downstairs, maybe not on display, and share them publicly or just tell the stories of what goes on. So the best way certainly is through social media because it's constant. It's updated every single day. Our website we just redid about a year and a half ago and really has been a great way for people to keep up with what's going on. And most people don't realize how much is on our website. There's just, you could get lost for hours and hours and hours on there. And then, honestly, getting out here, booking the trip, finding time to come here, that's how you follow this place. And certainly we're grateful at how many people do follow us, but sometimes I'm amazed that we don't have 10 million followers given how much people love baseball.
Right.
Again, it's just trying to make sure that people know that this place exists and that we're doing all this stuff every day.
And especially in the off season when you are looking to get your baseball fix, the content you guys put out there, or being a member and supporting you guys financially and all the perks that come with that, the Hall of Fame is a very easy place to want to support, whether you've been here or not, but you have to actually be here.
I appreciate that pitch. I mean, for those that don't realize, we also have a magazine that comes out 6 times a year. And so that also, for people that love baseball history, it's an amazing publication. And like you said, if you want your baseball fix, it's a great part of a Hall of Fame membership.
And what about you personally? How can people reach out to you specifically and keep up with what you're doing these days?
Well, Twitter is probably where I'm most active. I mean, that's really the kind of professional network I use the most. It's just HOFPREZ. I took that handle from Jeff Idelson. I did not come up with HOFPrez, but I'm proud to have this position and really kind of show life here at the Hall that way. And so that's probably the easiest way. I tend to respond to DMs and pretty much I don't have that many followers that I can't engage with people. I do think it's important that as an institution, we're responding to people when they send in emails. You can go in through our website and pretty much send any question you have, and we're going to get back to people. Yeah. Same thing with letters that people send to the Hall. Those are the best ways, but I often am wandering around the building too. So if anybody ever sees me when they're here, please stop me, say hello. I truly love watching people love the Hall of Fame. It's a fun thing to do every day.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Josh.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and come back anytime.
I will. And now it's time for a segment called What'd You Think, Mom?, where we talk to my mom who just listened to the interview with me and we ask her what she thinks. This is my real actual mom. Yeah. Her name is Lori, but I've always just called her Mom. Can you say something to prove that you are my mom?
Yeah. I was your personal photographer the first time you went to the Hall of Fame and took a pretty foretelling photograph of you while we were there that we didn't realize the impact of that until decades later.
Yeah, I was at the Hall of Fame in the winter of 2021, maybe. And it was the week before Christmas, which gave me the idea, if you want to go visit the Hall of Fame, that's the time of year to see the museum.
Yeah, we need to talk about that later, but yes.
Literally, I was from open to close for 2 straight days. Other than the docents, I was the only person in the museum, which was amazing. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Mm-hmm. And at one point, I went to the spot on the second floor where we took that picture in front of the Black Sox display. And I was going to recreate that picture holding up my Cooperstown Dreams Park jersey that I was wearing in the photo when I was 12. Mm-hmm. And since nobody was there on the floor, I couldn't ask somebody, hey, can you take this picture of me? I had to rely on the self-timer, which is fine. I take a million pictures like that all the time. But to have the same kind of angle, I needed to set it on something, and there was nothing there. There was just It was just the floor. So I walked around the corner and grabbed a garbage can that was somewhere else in the museum and dragged it across. Whatever. It was
Sir.
not, I was going to put it back. So I'm taking the picture and a docent walks around the corner, and they weren't upset because they could see I was taking a photo, but they were just like, how'd that garbage can get there? And so I got done taking the picture, and they came up and they're like, can we help you, basically? And I was like, yeah, here's the picture I just recreated. And they're like, oh my God, that's so cool.
Right?
So it kept me out of jail, I think.
There we go.
That I had the proof that I had the actual photo from 1999. But very cool to have those moments where you can know that you were there years prior, and then you're standing there again years later. And to have that documented proof is pretty neat.
Yeah, and it took us 25 years to recreate being in the place together, but we did it, and it was fantastic as much as the first time was.
Yeah. So what did you think of the Josh Rawitch interview?
Talking about a museum, which it's a topic after my own heart, and to have that job must be absolutely amazing. Very high pressured, I would think, because you have a lot of balls to juggle that someone without listening to this interview, you wouldn't even realize half the things that are under his purview, his responsibility. You have a lot of different populations that you are trying to keep happy, all while running a not-for-profit and pulling in visitors and fundraising and all that. It is a complicated situation.
And pulling in visitors to a place that is not easy to get to.
Right.
Josh mentioned in the interview the person who lives in the building that used to be the train station. First of all, how cool would that be?
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not how people travel anymore.
Yeah.
Now it's flying or driving. And the closest airport is, I think, Albany, which is an hour and a half away, or 2 hours.
Syracuse.
Or Syracuse is the next closest,
Right.
I think. So if that's how you're going to choose to get there, you're flying to a couple hours away, then you need to rent a car and drive and then get a hotel or whatever. Or you need to drive the whole way. And it's really, again, not super close to anything. So I think Josh mentioned he wants to get people to change it from having it on their bucket list to their to-do list. And I think the people who have it on their bucket list, it's because it's kind of difficult to get there.
Yeah. But anyone listening to us right now, that's who needs to figure it out.
Absolutely.
Just figure it out and do it. It will be so worth it. We were lucky enough to go to Cooperstown this December to interview Josh. And it was wonderful to be there at that time of year. It was absolutely a hallmark town, the way he described it. It had just snowed. The lake was there. There's so much history beyond the baseball. It was just a quaint town where we had good food. It was nice and relaxed to walk into that plaque gallery and spend as much time as we wanted. And we were basically the only people in there. That was a moment. And for people who really want to deep dive when you're there and absorb the space, it couldn't have been better.
Yeah, people have asked me many times, I want to plan a trip to Cooperstown. How much time do I need to allot for myself? And I always tell them, if you're going to go through the trouble of getting there, give yourself 2 full days.
Right.
And that might not even be enough, but 2 full days minimum to really soak things in. I mean, if you're a person who goes to museums to read plaques and read placards and take photos and look at things, there's just so much history. And, you can spend an hour looking at one case.
Yeah.
On the 3rd floor, they've got the case that has all of the World Series rings and
Right.
pendants and things that teams have given to their players over the years. You can stand there for 25 minutes. And it's like, that is a 4 foot by 4 foot section of this 3-story museum.
Right. And I'm going to be optimistic and hopeful and say we aren't the only 2 people who did that.
Yeah.
You can't help but be amazed because you're thinking, who wore that ring?
Right.
Who were the players who received those items? And that just goes right through you because now it's in front of you. It's an artifact. And that brings it home. It's not just something you're reading in a book. You're looking at it. It's right in front of you. It's tangible.
And so many things in that museum that you never thought of or never knew existed, or people think like, okay, Major League Baseball is the Hall of Fame. Yeah, that's the majority of it. But Major League Baseball, as most people think of it, is like, okay, 1901 is the modern era. That's when the American League started. So 1901 to the current day. There are so many 19th century baseball artifacts in the Hall of Fame. things like trophy balls where the two teams would play each other and whoever won got the baseball and it was painted gold, and then they wrote the statistics and the date, and like the average baseball fan doesn't even know that that exists or that that was a thing that happened. And the Hall of Fame has like 100 of them on display from like from the 1850s. And early equipment, early ephemera, and teams used to go on world tours. And so they've got photos of teams at the Sphinx in Egypt. Like,
it's crazy.
Things that when you think in your head, if you've never been to the Hall of Fame, like I'm going to go to the Hall of Fame, I'm going to see Babe Ruth's locker, and I'm going to see Mickey Mantle's uniform, and I'm going to see Henry Aaron's bat. Yeah, you are going to see all those things. But there are so many things in the Hall of Fame that you don't even know that you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that you just have to go there to see it.
And if you do know about that stuff, like you've done interviews with people who really were experts on the early era. So we know about those things. There's a difference between knowing and then seeing artifacts from over 150 years ago.
Yeah.
It was quite the experience. And it was a different experience for me going in 2024 than in 1999 because I didn't know a fraction of what I know now about the history of baseball. And that is what I love because I'm a historian, so that's what I love. And you will not be disappointed. Your socks, whether they're white or red, will be blown right off.
It's interesting the coaches and the leadership that Josh grew up around and was lucky enough to experience, from Bobby Knight at Indiana University to Joe Torre at his baseball camp and then working together with the Dodgers. Is there a manager from throughout baseball history that you wish you could have played for or been led by?
I'm going to say Casey Stengel.
Okay.
Because
you do love him.
He was such a character, and there was a connection to him somehow to my mom and where she worked at Geno's Steakhouse in Harvey. That was the first autograph, like of somebody really big. And of course, I wish I knew exactly where that was today, and someday I will find it, I'm sure.
What would he have been doing? Was he there to visit Lou Boudreau?
I would think that when teams rolled through Chicago, you knew that there was a fine steakhouse on the South Side, and that was where my mom worked for 30 years. She ran the office, and she was a head honcho. When people rolled through that would have been celebrities that maybe she wasn't aware of, Steve the Maitre D was like, do you know who this is? You know, and then she would go up and get something or whatever. And that's, I believe, how the Casey Stengel thing came about.
Interesting. Because I figured you love Tris Speaker. He was player manager.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Oh, that's a tough one. I didn't even think about him.
And then Lou Boudreau, same thing. You've got such a connection to him, and he was player manager too. But yeah, Casey Stengel's a funny one.
Yeah, I think he would just be so outrageous at times, right? But still a great manager. When Josh said you had this voice that resonated throughout the generations, and what he talked about was with Vin Scully working in the booth for so many years, that made me think of Harry Carey, but more so first Jack Brickhouse as the Chicagoan. But then I also thought of Mel Allen. In college, I don't know how, because I wasn't a crazy fan or anything, but somehow I got hooked on This Week in Baseball because of Mel Allen's voice. And so I would listen to it every week by myself. And I never saw a picture of him. I didn't know he was associated with the team. You know, it was just, he hooked me. And it meant something to me when we went to see the Frick honorees and see Mel Allen.
Yeah, he's a major figure in baseball history. Yeah.
I think we kind of take that for granted. Other sportscasters who came about when I was already an adult, like let's say Bob Costas, for example, there's going to come a time where he won't be around, and I'm going to miss that voice. I really like that those people are being recognized because I think they are as much a part of the game as anything. They are the ones who grab you, especially years ago before you had television, where the voice put you there.
Right. Yeah, those guys painted the picture for you.
Right.
I thought it was cool the way Josh described trying to get donations of artifacts from the players to the Hall of Fame instead of keeping it for themselves or selling it in an auction or something like that. And he mentioned Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Tom Seaver and Henry Aaron all donated their entire collections to the Hall of Fame, and that Brooks Robinson made a big donation after he passed away as well. But he said, this is a way that you can live forever.
Right.
And I hope that that's the way that the players look at it, especially these guys who aren't on Hall of Fame trajectories for their own careers. This is a way that you can be remembered forever. I just like that Josh understood that and had such a succinct way of stating it.
Right. I might be jaded, but I would think, holy cow, if the Hall of Fame is on the phone saying, hey, we would like your jersey or whatever, you'd be like, okay, do you want me to drive it over? Because, right, to me, that would be such an honor. Mm-hmm. And I would hope that it still would be an honor, and they wouldn't be weighing what is the monetary value to me or my family versus what is this to my future generations behind me who can come and realize that I did something, might have only been one day, might have been a couple times, but it got me here among the greats.
Yeah, to me, it wouldn't be the monetary value. It would be the sentimental attachment of like, I'm a collector. I want that.
Yeah.
Like, that's my jersey that I wore during my perfect game. I want it.
Right.
But when I'm gone, I want it to be preserved and I want it to be restored if there's issues with it or anything like that. And that's where the Hall of Fame, like, you can't beat what they can do for your artifacts and your legacy.
Right. The beauty of a museum. I thought some of the advice that Josh offered to current students or people young in their career was really helpful and insightful. The more things you can do to make yourself valuable and different than everyone else who's maybe in the same field that you are, that's going to give you a leg up. And when he goes to call the one guy who advised him to learn a second language or pursue that and thank him for opening his eyes to like, yeah, maybe I should be doing that more than just my high school Spanish classes. And how just that decision right there changed Josh's life and put him on a trajectory that he was just, opportunities happened for him because he had that in his arsenal. When he went back to that gentleman to say, thank you for giving me that great advice, the guy said, yeah, I say that to everyone. You're the only one who did it. Be the only one who did it. You never know what will happen. You know, how many times did he say, the only reason I got that was because I spoke Spanish. You know, I'm doing the opening ceremony for a Dominican baseball center. Why? Because he was out there. The other piece of advice he gave was study abroad. Oh my gosh. Even if you can't study abroad, travel abroad. Travel the country. Get out of your comfort zone. Go see what else is out there, because it will help you grow in ways that just reading can't, and your whole perspective will change. It's such great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Josh kind of talked a little bit about the layout of the museum itself, and he mentioned that the Hall of Fame likes to tell people to start their tour on the second floor. And I think that that is probably the way to do it. But the first floor has the plaque gallery, but it also has the art gallery that has the original paintings by Greg Kreinler and Leroy Neiman and Kadir Nelson and Norman Rockwell and Payne Prophet. Was there something on the first floor that you, thinking back of our trip to the Hall of Fame, that you're like, oh, that's the thing from the first floor that I remember?
When he talked about how the plaque gallery was his favorite place to go in the morning when no one was there, that comment alone about don't follow the lemmings up to the second floor, break the mold, go have that moment in the plaque gallery. We were lucky. It didn't matter when we went because we went in December. But to be in that plaque gallery and just absorb those names and not have someone crowding you or whatever, that's why you're there, for a lot of the reason that you're there. And it was great to just have that moment and walk in and get the long view of the end of the center aisle. There's the homage to the first class. And you're drawn like a magnet right to that. And no one's in your way. That was a key moment for me of the whole. And there were so many cool things that we saw. And the paintings that we saw by the artists that you mentioned, of course, that's way in my wheelhouse. Seeing the originals were fantastic.
Yeah, seeing the Norman Rockwell in person.
Right.
I mean, it's such an iconic piece. You've seen it on covers of magazines and Saturday Evening Posts and like reprinted and repurposed on puzzles and coffee mugs. Like, you've seen that image a billion times.
Right.
And then to stand there and look at the painting.
Right.
It's like,
there.
Oh, wow, this is cool.
There in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Because to see it in the Art Institute or another art museum would be cool. But seeing it there in Cooperstown.
In context.
It was with whipped cream on it.
Yeah, I like how the docents have been instructed, seemingly, to kind of let people do their own thing. And if they've got questions, then yeah, come up and help them and answer. But especially in the plaque gallery, I don't want to go in there and have somebody giving me a tour and pointing out the plaques and let me absorb this on my own. And that's exactly how they do it. I love it.
Right.
And they're around. So it's not like it's impossible to find somebody if you do have a question or if you just want to talk to somebody and like share the experience with somebody. but they do let you experience it the way that you want to experience it. And if you bring them in, sure, they're happy to help and happy to talk, but they're also happy to just let you be in that room however you want to be in that room.
And I think that's important because I wanted to go through all the list of names of who was in the gallery before we even went, because I thought I want to make sure I see the people I want to see. My list is going to be completely different than yours, than so-and-so's, than so-and-so's. And so to have a docent come over and say, they might have in their head, these are the key plaques you want to see. And
everybody's fandom is different.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And the deeper you are, the more obscure you might be. And I think some of mine were a little bit more obscure.
But even like you said, the difference between our visit in 99 and our visit in 2024, your list would have been wildly different both times.
Right.
So yeah, it's...
My list in 99 would have been a fraction of the length. And now it was so much more meaningful. Even the names I would have wanted to see in 99. I'm looking at them at a whole different level of understanding.
Yeah, another thing about the first floor that I think a lot of people miss or don't realize is there is kind of behind the plaque gallery. If you go up the ramp and around the corner, that's where the Ford C. Frick Award people are. And there's another little alcove of famous baseball movies. And we've got movie posters and artifacts from the filmings.
That was well done.
That's where the Savannah Bananas case was. You know, there's a lot of different kind of things. There's like a kids area back in that corner. And unless you go up that ramp and walk around, you just miss all of that.
Right.
I'm glad to have made it a point to get up that ramp and see those displays in person this time.
Yeah, that was a very interesting part. And just the structure of the museum itself, too, because when we were back there, you could see into a courtyard, and then that begged the question to go out and check that out. And then the history of the town, which is James Fenimore Cooper and his ancestors. He was right outside, statue was right there, too. So, yeah, it pays to make sure you don't miss that. Take that little avenue up there.
So then the second floor is where the bulk of the artifacts and the exhibits are, and that's where the new Souls of the Game exhibit is, which opened in May of 2024, which honors the history of black baseball and celebrates its impact on the game and on our country. But that's also where the theater is, where we watch the welcome video, which really kind of sets the tone for your visit to the hall. What are some of the artifacts or exhibits on the second floor that really stand out to you? And 6 months later, after our visit, what do you remember from the second floor that you're like, oh, that was cool?
I did really enjoy the video. I thought that was well done, and the setting of it was great. The imagery, the sound, the way they did it, I mean, it set it up. I think they did a great job with highlighting the players that are the superstars because they became the icons of the game. With Babe Ruth, there was a life-size mannequin with his uniform on, and you look at the size of the mannequin, and seeing a jersey hanging in the locker would not have gotten the point across of what a beast of a man that guy was.
And that mannequin is wearing the uniform from the Babe Bows Out photo, like him saying goodbye to the game in 1948. Right. So he's a shell of his former self. Right. So imagining what he must have looked like in 1927 when he was Murderers Row Babe Ruth. It's a powerful thing to see in front of your eyes.
That's right. And that whole Babe Ruth section, there were so many artifacts within there that told the story, little details that people might not know. But to see the artifacts tucked in there throughout, it was just fantastic.
Yeah, and then the second floor also had Women in Baseball exhibit and the Latin Baseball exhibit. So, yeah, second floor has a ton of stuff, and I think that's why people are directed to start there, because if you're not going to get through the whole museum, you want to at least get through the place that has most of the stuff. You don't want to start on the third floor, which has amazing things also, but then you miss the MVP trophies from, Lou Gehrig's seasons and things like that.
Yeah, it sets it up for you. You need to see the history and build up to what you're going to ultimately see.
Yeah, the third floor used to be where the Sacred Grounds exhibit was that honored all of the ballparks in baseball history. Now that's where the new Yaku baseball exhibit that Josh mentioned during our interview is going to be. And the third floor is also where the Shoebox Treasures exhibit is, which examines the history, design, and production of baseball cards, the 1980s boom that turned collecting into a multi-million-dollar industry, and the joy and camaraderie that so many collectors have found in the hobby. There's some more original artwork up there, like pieces by Tim Carroll, who's been on the show, and Mike Noren, who you might know as Gummy Arts. And then also the third floor has kind of like the modern day exhibit, a locker of every current team. And it's filled with more rotating kind of artifacts of players from the past 5 to 10 years. If like a player hits for the cycle, they've got his cleats, or the pitcher throws a no-hitter or a perfect game, they've got his hat. So things that aren't necessarily going to be permanently displayed at the Hall of Fame, but the Hall of Fame acquires these things, like Josh talked about in the interview, where either he or a representative from the Hall of Fame is at these games or makes a call afterwards and to say like, hey, we want the thing. That's where the thing goes to be on display as quickly as possible. And so the next time a fan of the Diamondbacks goes to the Hall of Fame, they know I can go up to that third floor and see the locker, and here's all the things from my favorite team.
Right, and it speaks to the dilemma of how do you find the right balance between respecting the history but also pulling in modern things to get set with your newest generation, who are your fans, and you want to make sure everyone's being accounted for there. You're drawing the interest of everybody who walks through the doors. And I remember when we went in 1999, I just don't remember what the event was. We were there in July of 1999. Something major had just happened not more than 3 weeks before. It was like it had just happened. And we walked through that front door, and they already had, in a glass case right at the front, 3 artifacts from that event. And we all just went, holy cow, there are the shoes. And we just watched it on TV. And so you had all these 12-year-olds going, oh, my God. It was like, it just set the tone of this is a living museum.
Right. And that's what you want a Hall of Fame to be. You want it to be the history, but you also want to have it show the importance of the modern game, and like the players that are playing today one day hope to be in this museum, and here's how we're going to get that started.
And even if they're not entering with a plaque, they had that one shining moment, and maybe it was one game, one play, whatever it was, and we saw it, and boom, it's right there, and that was really cool.
Now that it's been a few months and you've had some time to kind of reflect on our trip as a whole, what are the things that you think back of, whether it was the Hall of Fame or just being in Cooperstown or getting there? When you think of this trip, what are the things that stand out to you?
When Josh was talking about the advice that Jeff Idelson was giving him of what would it be like to move to Cooperstown, because when you look at the map and you see it's like kind of in the middle of nowhere, it's not, but relatively speaking, it depends where you're coming from. Life would be great there. I could see myself living there in a heartbeat. It was very scenic and, like I said before, historic. To walk down the main street and see all these different, we went at a time when it was off season, but you could still see what would be happening in season with the storefronts that are geared towards baseball, memorabilia, souvenirs, or whatever. We spent a lot of time, a couple different days, in this fantastic bookstore.
Yeah, Willis Money Books.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And staying on the lake at Hotel Otesaga and soaking in that space, going into the one drawing room where all the Hall of Famers go check in on induction weekend, walking downstairs. And this is, even if you don't stay there, it's worth walking around. On the lower level, there were glass enclosed cases where there was an etched glass for every Hall of Famer who was still alive. And when they are in town, they can come and enjoy their favorite cocktail in their individual glass. When we were there, I think 3 or 4 Hall of Famers had passed away within a period of time before we were there. And there was a white rose in every one of their glasses. Just seeing the history of that, the tradition of that. As you're walking around, you're thinking who was walking down those halls, because it's a very old, grand place to be. Just gorgeous on the lakefront, and the history goes back millennia to think of the native people who were on that lake. It was just great. It's a great place for solitude and relaxation, and we didn't even get to do all the things that were there. There were museums there that we didn't have the opportunity to go to just because of our schedule. It was definitely a place I would definitely go back, because every time you go, the hall is going to be different. There are going to be new artifacts. There are going to be new exhibits. And then you're still going to go back because maybe you learned something about someone new who's in that little plaque gallery that they have there.
I've got a big postcard collection. A lot of them are baseball related, and that's kind of how it started building my collection. But a lot of them at this point are just like kind of historic buildings or postcards commemorating historical things from the past 150 years. It's an interesting way to learn about the history of a place that you go to, is to see what kind of linen postcards were produced 100 years ago. Like, what did they think was important enough to document and save and like promote their town and promote when you come visit Chicago, here's where you can see here. Every city basically has a postcard for their post office.
Right.
Those were
Yep.
major buildings, a lot of churches. But Cooperstown, one of the postcards that I have in my collection is Hotel Otesaga. And so it's not just the baseball history because a bunch of Hall of Famers stay there, which, like, yes, that is part of it now. And that's one of the reasons why people listening to this episode would want to go there. But it does have historical significance as well. And it's been there for 100 and, however many years. But to see some of those postcards is really cool. And that was one of my favorite things driving to Cooperstown on this trip. We stopped at the Nicholson Bridge in rural Pennsylvania because that was finished being built in 1915. And at the time, it was the largest concrete structure in the world. And then 8 years later, when they built Yankee Stadium, the theory is that the facade was modeled after this bridge. And so I've got postcards of the bridge from 110 years ago. And I have them because of their supposed relation and connection to Yankee Stadium, but I'd never seen it in person. And we're like, okay, we're never going to be closer than we are. And it wasn't directly on the way, but it was close enough. So we just jut out a little bit, go see it, took pictures for 20 minutes and right back on the road.
Yeah. And when you see it, you're like, oh, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I would have never even really learned about that bridge or thought to go there on a road trip if it weren't for the postcard collection.
Yeah.
That started because of baseball stuff.
Yeah. I want to go to the part of the interview where you were talking about the philosophy of being in the hall or not being in the hall, and especially with Shoeless Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with you that Joe's not being in the hall up to this point has kept him in the public eye, especially after the movies and everything, which wouldn't have been such a big deal if he was already in the hall.
Right.
You know my affinity for the 1920 Cleveland Indians team and the whole story, and I got hooked on that after I had read the book The Pitch That Killed, and it's such an amazing story. That's when I learned that Joe had actually played on the Cleveland Indians before he played on the Chicago White Sox, and kind of set up the 1920s season where you had the White Sox playing, you had the Black Sox on the team, and it was an intense season. And on top of all the drama that was going on with that, you also had the drama of Carl Mays throwing a pitch that ended up killing Ray Chapman, who was a beloved figure on the Cleveland Indian team. Tris Speaker especially was somebody that popped out during my reading of that book, but also I came to know the name Napoleon Lajoie and who he was. So they were in like the second class in 1937 being inducted into the Hall of Fame. To me, as a relatively new deep dive baseball fan, I would think that most baseball fans who I think would know more than me would know those names, and they don't. And that gets me every time. Like I'll say something about Tris Speaker or Napoleon Lajoie, and they're like, who are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And their records stand up with Joe.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
and-
If anything, their numbers are better than Joe's because they were able to play full careers.
Right. To me, that proves the point.
Absolutely. It's funny, I've been posting these on this day in baseball history posts on social media, and the posts about old players, even if it's Hall of Famers, don't get the same kind of traction as the posts from players from the 70s or more modern days.
Yeah.
You know, like it just resonates with people because they were alive and they remember that, so even though Randy Hundley is nowhere near the player that Tris Speaker was, those posts do better because Tris Speaker's been forgotten.
Yeah.
If you would have talked to people 100 years ago, they'd say, oh yeah, he's the best center fielder who's ever lived.
Right.
And he was at the time, but now he's probably not. He's still in the top 5 or top 10 for sure. But now you ask people who the best center fielder of all time is, and they'll say Willie Mays or they'll say Ken Griffey Jr.
Mm-hmm.
His name won't even come up because he's just so far removed from
Right.
people's consciousness. To me, like, that's the difficulty of the Hall of Fame. You see what people react to and respond to. So you want to have your museum reflect that because you want people to come and enjoy themselves and feel like, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have a responsibility to tell the history of the game and to promote the greatest players who have ever played. And the records that are being broken, these are the guys who set them originally.
Right.
You need to find that balance. And I think the Hall of Fame does a great job of doing that, but it's a difficult job to be done.
This gets back to why I didn't want a docent talking to me in the plaque gallery. Those were two of the guys that I needed to go see. And there were others as well that are really old timers and not your norm. And just like you said, everyone has a different slice of history, something that resonates with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an individual experience for every person who walks through that door.
I asked this question to Josh during the interview. If you had a time machine and could go back and watch any particular Hall of Fame induction ceremony from throughout history, which one would you have liked to have been around to witness in person?
If you keep me to one, it would be the initial class, not because of most of the names that you would think. It would be for Christy Mathewson.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one that just all about him.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be a close second to be in the second class because of Tris Speaker and Lajoie.
Well, the good news is if you went to the 1939 inaugural ceremony, you'd see both of them.
Yeah, it's a twofer.
Yeah.
So that should have been my answer, right?
Yeah.
I'll change it to that.
Mine would be Ted Williams in 1966 because it's Ted Williams. It's also Casey Stengel. But I want to be in the crowd and watching the faces of the people, hearing Ted Williams say, this museum needs to induct black players. And see how does the crowd react to him mentioning by name Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, who then 5 years later, Satchel Paige is inducted in 71 and Josh Gibson in 72. And it's only because of Ted Williams saying that during his speech. And so obviously what he said worked, but I want to be in the crowd and see what did the people hearing it that day in real time, like how did they react? Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the most important Hall of Fame induction speeches that's ever been given. I'd like to be in the crowd for that one.
As just a straight up fan and not a historian, I think I'd also want to be there for Euchers. It never gets old watching that. The best part of watching clips of it is seeing how he cracks up the players behind him.
Yeah. Okay, but what were some of the other things in and around Cooperstown that we did that you enjoyed? I mean, we talked about the bookstore a little bit, but we should talk about it more. It is not just a baseball bookstore. So if you're in Cooperstown or planning a trip, yeah, you're going to find incredible baseball books. And I've built a huge library over the years, buying dozens and dozens of books from them that are baseball related. But they also have presidential sections and history and...
That's where I was.
Yeah, I mean, they've got everything, art books and biographies, and literally it's an enormous used bookstore, and it's incredible. Right. Great prices, fair when you buy a bunch of stuff. They cut you some deals sometimes. If you're a member of the Hall of Fame, you get a discount.
And it's thousands of books, so you could be in a back room in the stacks, and if you're a bibliophile, have someone come get you after a certain amount of time because time flies.
Yeah. Chris has been really good to me there, and we've gotten to know Emily over the past couple of years as well.
Yeah.
So really great staff who they love books and they care about that place and they care about Cooperstown itself. So I always make it a point to stop by and buy a bunch of stuff when I'm in town.
Yeah, it's dangerous, but thrilling. For me, with my history, there were a couple different things. First of all, it was interesting to hear the background of how Cooperstown came to be, and then how parts of it have stayed in the Clark family for all this time. And Jane Forbes Clark being a decorator and being responsible for what you see when you walk into the hotel, and her dedication to preserving things, preserving the history, making things always look great. You know, like when we were there in the wintertime, obviously you don't have fresh things growing. But even in the dead of winter, it was beautiful and scenic because you still had decorations on the main street. In the summer, there are baskets of flowers. That doesn't just happen. That is coming from someone's dedication to this is how we want to present, like a Norman Rockwell Street that you're driving down. We did a couple stops. There was a park closer to the lake, but then there's a cove right there in the lake where Meeting Rock is peeking out, and that is where the different tribes would meet, and that is still, there's still homage to that rock. Some of the Clark family history is based in New York City. The architect who designed the Dakota building where John Lennon lived when he was assassinated right outside the door, that architect then designed a little tower that is out in the lake, and you can see it from the hotel as well. You know, so there's going to be something for everybody. There's architectural interest, there's historical significance going back to pre-revolutionary time. James Fenimore Cooper, you know, if you've read any of those books, Last of the Mohicans, if you saw the movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, that is where you are. And you can easily transport yourself into that setting because it's not so far of a stretch.
A lot of times, like during induction weekend, you'll see groupings of Hall of Famers kind of like sitting in rocking chairs on a back porch. That is at the hotel.
We were on those rocking chairs.
We were on those chairs and sitting out on that porch, and it's cool to see those posts on social media every year and think like, okay, now I know exactly where they are and exactly what they're looking at, and cool to be in the place.
Right. And if you do make the trip, allow yourself some time to just absorb the space around, because you will see photographs of these things that are outside the walls of the hall. And then you can relate. It's why I like to always go to the place where history happens, because it gives you a whole different perspective when you're in that space.
Yeah, so this was the second interview from this particular trip to Cooperstown. The first one was episode 7 of this season, where we talked to Tom Cattell, who was Mickey Mantle's former autograph agent. So go back and listen to that one. Hope to have another episode in the future that is Hall of Fame related. So stay tuned for next season, because this is the end of season 4.
Wow.
What's been your favorite episode of season 4?
You know, I can't just pick one. Come on.
That's the game. You have to.
I would have to say Nancy Faust and Brian Powers, because they were two different types of interview.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a thrill to hear Nancy and then get to meet her. And I'm a Chicago girl, and she's woven in the fabric of my life in all different kinds of ways. And so that was fantastic to hear her story, and a thrill to recently go see her play back at Comiskey Park.
Mm-hmm.
But what Brian Powers is doing just amazes me. Watching videos of a tour going through a ballpark and hearing the sound and seeing all the little details that he has picked up on and bringing those cathedrals of baseball alive, that just really resonated with me. I think it's amazing. And that he was the first guy to figure that out is just wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay tuned and keep following the social media for the podcast, because we have some very big, important, exciting Nancy Faust related news that's coming later this summer, sooner rather than later. So even though this is the last time you will hear a new episode from us for a few months, it will not be the last time you hear from us.
And hope to see you at Sabre.
Yes, also that.
Looking forward to meeting some people that I've communicated with and know by name, but I'm thrilled to meet people in person.
Yeah, we will be printing 11 by 14 glossy photos.
Of us?
No, of you.
Oh, God.
We'll be signing them. They will be $100 a piece. All right, $50 a piece.
I'm going to have to buy the whole stash of that.
So yeah, if you're going to be in Dallas or Arlington or Fort Worth or wherever.
Irving,
Texas, wherever it's going to be. Well, Arlington will be the Texas Rangers game. So
Okay.
we'll be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, come say hi. I'll have a table at the exhibitors room selling stuff, just old baseball books that I have doubles of, that you buy one copy because you just want a copy in your collection and then find a copy in nicer shape. And now I'm selling the first copy. So
Yep.
stuff like that, where I've got a bunch of baseball related vinyl records that I've been collecting over the years. Same kind of thing where I've got duplicates that I'm ready to let go of. T-shirts from the podcast.
Yeah.
All sorts of stuff. So
No glossies.
come check it. Well, we'll see.
Okay.
And then hopefully some CDs. I'm not sure what will be on those, but maybe some CDs. So yeah, check it out. Follow the podcast online. Say hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, so that's it for Season 4. In the introduction of this episode, I mentioned how there are a handful of ways for you to follow the podcast online. In addition to liking, subscribing, and giving My Baseball History a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app, please make sure you're also following us on Facebook, Blue Sky, Twitter, and Instagram, where we are at Shoeless Podcast on each platform. By following us there, you'll get some bonus content throughout the month, and you'll be able to interact with us to let us know what you think of the show. You can also sign up for Clearing the Bases, our email newsletter, by heading to shoelesspodcast.substack.com. We publish 2 newsletters a month, which allow us to talk about lots of things we don't normally talk about on the show. I'll use that space to talk about the podcast, of course, but I'll also use it to write about baseball road trips I go on, to publish research I do, and to speak on current events in baseball, all of which are things I don't really do in episodes of My Baseball History. We'll also have giveaway contests that are exclusively for our newsletter subscribers, giving you even more chances to win some cool stuff. Look for a new issue to be published on the 2nd Friday and the 4th Friday of every month. If you have questions about the podcast or research you'd like to contribute to a future newsletter, submit something through the contact form on our website or email us at shoelesspodcast@gmail.com. Before the interview with Josh, I mentioned a trivia question you can answer to win something. And here's how you can do that. First, make sure you're following us on Twitter or Blue Sky at Shoeless Podcast. Then, find the pinned post at the top of our profile with the link to the Josh Rawitch episode, which asks this episode's trivia question. The answer to the trivia question was somewhere in this episode that you just finished listening to. Quote that post along with your answer, and we'll announce the winner before the next episode of the podcast goes live. You don't have to be the first person to answer, you just have to be right. But make sure you're following us on your preferred social media platform or your entry won't be counted. We'll pick one person who answered correctly, and they'll win a souvenir booklet from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, printed in 1949. These booklets were updated every year from the late 40s into the 1960s, showing photos from inside the museum, different artifacts on display at the time, the members of the Hall of Fame committee, and lists of the batting and pitching records of the Hall of Famers who had been inducted at that point. The 1949 version that you can win from this contest shows each of the 58 Hall of Fame plaques that had been created to be on display at that point, from Grover Cleveland Alexander to Denton T. Cy Young. We also do a separate giveaway related to every episode through our email newsletter, and the winner of that contest gets a different prize. So make sure you're signed up for that, and you'll have a chance to win something else this month too. In the introduction of this episode, I also spoke briefly about Doubleday Field. Again, I defer to the Hall of Fame's website. To tell the story of Doubleday Field, one has to start with the Mills Commission, which was appointed in 1905 to determine the origin of baseball. Though the committee considered much evidence, the testimony of Abner Graves in support of Abner Doubleday figured prominently. Both Graves and Doubleday had attended school together in Cooperstown. In letters to the committee, Graves claimed to have been present when Doubleday made changes to a local version of town ball. The committee's final report on December 30th, 1907 stated in part that the first scheme for playing baseball, according to the best evidence obtainable to date, was devised by Abner Doubleday at Cooperstown, New York in 1839. The citizens of Cooperstown appreciated the acclaim Doubleday had brought to their small village, but didn't find a suitable way to acknowledge it for many years. When National League President John K. Tenner came to Cooperstown in 1916, he visited a cow pasture owned by Elihu Finney. The Finney lot was a plot of ground once believed to have been used by Doubleday and other Cooperstown schoolboys to play the first game of baseball in 1839. John Tenner suggested that cow pasture be turned into a memorial to Doubleday. After the land in which the lone baseball field in Cooperstown stood was purchased in 1917 to build a hospital, Cooperstown residents began to think of the Finney lot as a suitable replacement. On June 2, 1919, the Cooperstown Chamber of Commerce's Playground Committee secured a lease from Alexander Finney, at the time the current owner of the lot, for the use of the grounds for 2 years with the option to buy it for the sum of $5,000. The original baseball diamond of America will soon respond with the crack of the bat and ball, Cooperstown's newspaper, the Freeman's Journal, reported on June 4, 1919. An appeal for volunteer labor will be made and the diamond placed in condition at once for games this summer. Soon, the local citizens were leveling the field, using dirt and ashes as filler on the swampy portions. On September 6, 1920, Doubleday Field officially opened. The first game was between Milford and Cooperstown. At that time, the National League's president was John Hadler, and he was present for and even umpired the first inning of that game. A vote in 1920 to buy the lot was turned down by Cooperstown taxpayers 204 to 151. So with the lease set to expire, a fundraising effort to raise the $5,000 necessary to acquire the lot was led by Dr. Ernest L. Pitcher, a local dentist. The fundraising group was not only soliciting contributions amongst its local denizens, but it was reaching out to a wider audience, even including New York State Governor Alfred E. Smith. In a letter dated August 12, 1920, Governor Smith's office replied, "The governor has established a rule to decline all contributions because he does not possess sufficient funds to make these donations. In view of the fact that you only ask for $1, however, we will be very glad to send it if you will agree not to use the governor's name. In other words, if you want the $1, we will send it, but because of the rule adopted, we would not want you to advertise the contribution." The committee members signed a note for an $1,800 loan from the First National Bank to finance trips to New York to obtain national support for the project. This strategy seemed to work, as the Doubleday Field cause soon appeared in a number of national publications. For in striving to preserve Doubleday Field, Cooperstown is striving to preserve a memorial to baseball in which every lover of that game should feel a genuine interest. If Cooperstown alone and unaided can raise $3,000, does it not seem reasonable to suppose that all the rest of the great baseball community, the thousands, yes millions of fans who have derived wholesome pleasure from the pioneer efforts of Abner Doubleday, should step into the breach and assume responsibility for the needful balance of but $2,000? It said in Baseball Magazine at the time. The committee's combined efforts raised $3,772, and in 1923, at a special election, the Cooperstown taxpayers authorized the purchase of the field by the village and appropriated the necessary funds. Title to Doubleday Field was officially transferred to the village of Cooperstown by a Supreme Court order dated September 29, 1923. Spalding's official baseball guide editorialized in favor of the purchase. From a sentimental standpoint, we hope that Cooperstown purchases the field if it is the will of the city to do so. If the town folks are without funds and do not feel that they can immediately afford to make a purchase, we hope that some way will be devised whereby the field can be secured and turned over to the city or to a memorial committee or association for permanent reservation. Even the Sporting News, the self-proclaimed baseball paper of the world, editorially advocated on November 29, 1923 that it is a cause that will interest all lovers of baseball, and if every male citizen of the United States pays 1/8 of 1% of the debt he owes to Abner Doubleday, the committee will be able to pave the outfield with blocks of 24-karat gold. A wooden grandstand was added in the spring of 1924, and taxpayers appropriated the funds to enlarge the plot in March of 1926. In a letter dated October 13, 1926, National League President John Hadler writes, I only hope that the people of Cooperstown will be able to hold on to this historic property. It may be years from now that professional baseball will honor itself by doing something to perpetuate this Doubleday Field, but I have faith that eventually something will be done. This, of course, is a personal expression and not official. In June of 1927, additional property was purchased for an entrance to the field. Beginning in 1933, Doubleday Field was again seeing changes, as not only were additional parcels of land purchased to expand left field, which was short of regulation size, but under a Works Progress Administration program, the entire field was graded, a new diamond was constructed, the area was fenced in, and the entrance was landscaped. On August 3, 1934, Lieutenant Governor M. William Bray of New York finally reopened the field, which the Associated Press called one of the finest playing grounds in eastern New York, when it reported on the story later that week. Cooperstown would be the setting for a summer-long series of events in 1939 in celebration of the centennial of the birth of baseball in the village 100 years before. This included the official dedication of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum on June 12th. In preparation for the numerous events it would be hosting, Doubleday Field, thanks to another WPA program, underwent a facelift beginning in 1938, which included building a steel and concrete grandstand, installing new wooden bleachers, seeding the field, laying a drainage system, setting out a new board fence for the outfield, and constructing stone masonry for the rest of the facility. All of this work would give the field a seating capacity of nearly 10,000 fans. Amazingly, the work on Doubleday Field was completed on the morning of May 6, 1939, the opening day of the Cooperstown Baseball Centennial. The first contest, which featured 2 upstate New York high schools, was one of more than a dozen the field hosted that summer. Most notable among these was an All-Star game on June 12th, after the first Hall of Fame induction ceremony, which featured ball players from every major league team. That 1939 All-Star game proved to be such a success that it prompted discussions of future games that would bring crowds back to Cooperstown for subsequent summers. Starting in 1940, the hugely popular Hall of Fame game, an in-season exhibition between 2 major league teams, would become an annual event which would see such stars as Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, and Henry Aaron homer in the hitter-friendly confines. After all, Doubleday Field's dimensions were just 296 feet to left, 336 to left center, 390 to dead center, 350 to right center, and just 312 feet to right field. Baseball Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis sent a letter to Cooperstown Mayor Rowan D. Spraker, dated February 23, 1942, extolling praise on the success of Doubleday Field. My congratulations upon the progress that has been made in liquidating the debt incurred by your village in the construction of Doubleday Field. For a village of 3,000 people, that is an accomplishment, Landis wrote. Baseball understands that through the shrine games played by major league teams, a material contribution has been made toward clearing that debt. It, therefore, will be very agreeable to the major leagues if the entire proceeds of the 1942 game are turned over to the village toward completion of the payment of the Doubleday Field debt. While Doubleday Field was playing host to mostly area youth, things changed in 1942 when World War II forced a minor league team, the Quebec Athletics of the Canadian American League, to use it for spring training. Over the years, the park has been the site of football games, concerts, community events, and much more. In 1959, the first base section of the stands was donated by Thomas Yawkey, owner of the Boston Red Sox at the time. Doubleday Field has seen other changes, including new sections having replaced the old uncovered stands where only the grandstand remains from where the refurbished park opened in 1939. Today, the fabled 6,600-seat ball field situated between Susquehanna, Pioneer, Elm, and Main Streets in Cooperstown surrounded in its idyllic setting with quaint houses and majestic trees, is not only a destination for baseball fans, but baseball teams from around the country. Owned and operated by the village of Cooperstown, Doubleday Field will play host to more than 350 baseball games this year, ranging from youth baseball to high school and collegiate tournaments to senior leagues. My first time seeing a game actually being played at Doubleday Field in person was on May 25th, 2024, when 14 Hall of Famers and 24 legendary players, many of whom had played on the historic field throughout the years, came together for the Hall of Fame East-West Classic, which paid tribute to the legends of black baseball. Former Phillies star Ryan Howard went 2 for 3 with a 3-run home run in the bottom of the 5th inning to win the game's MVP award and lead Team East past Team West 5-4 in front of 5,740 fans. I had been to Doubleday Field a number of times before that and had been inside the stadium to take pictures and walk around, but until last May, I'd never actually seen a game there. Sitting in the stands with friend of the show William Peebles of Huntington Baseball Company, I couldn't help but think how cool it would be to play on that field. After asking a few questions to some people in the know, I believe that may be a possibility. I've already personally organized and played in 1860-style vintage baseball games at Shoeless Joe Jackson Memorial Park in Greenville, South Carolina, at the Ty Cobb Museum in Royston, Georgia, and at Historic League Park in Cleveland, Ohio, so I know what it takes to make an event like that happen. And for 2026, in honor of this episode's guest, Josh Rawitch, hosting a game like that at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown, New York has moved from my bucket list over to my to-do list. So why am I telling you this here in a podcast episode? Because I don't know 20 people who live in or around Cooperstown who would be able to fill 2 full teams of vintage players so we can make this game happen. And that's where you come in. If you're listening to this right now and you feel like you can make it to Cooperstown next year to play in a vintage baseball game, send me an email at shoelesspodcast@gmail.com with the subject line Doubleday Field 2026, and I'll add you to the list of potential players for next year. If enough people are interested, we'll figure out a time that works best for all of us and a time where we can reserve the field, and I'll make it happen. If you don't know what 1860-style vintage baseball is, I promise it's not intimidating at all, and people of all ages, skill levels, and genders can play. I've written up a little description of the rules on the website, so I'll link those in the liner notes and you can check them out if you want to before committing. But for real, it's just going to be a bunch of friends having a good time. There aren't going to be any scouts there giving out scholarships or minor league contracts, and while we like the games to be competitive, there are 2 main goals for my vintage games. First and foremost, it's to have fun. But secondly, and possibly even more foremostly, it's for no one to get hurt. We all have lives to live and jobs to get back to, so the last thing any of us need is to sustain an injury during a fun game like this. I'm not sure how many more years my knees have left, so I've got to get these types of experiences in while I still can. And it would be really awesome if you were a part of it too. So again, if that sounds like something you want to participate in, or if you might be willing to donate some money to help pay for the field rental or for uniforms or for equipment so we can play, email me at shoelesspodcast@gmail.com with the subject line Doubleday Field 2026, and I'll be in touch. I would love to see you there. If you think this episode was worth $1, please click the donate button in the upper right corner of our website, shoelesspodcast.com. That is a direct link to my PayPal profile where you can make a donation in any amount. If you don't have PayPal and you want to send a donation through Venmo, Zelle, Cash App, or any other platform, shoot me an email at shoelesspodcast@gmail.com and I'll send you directions for whichever method you prefer. You can also leave a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast. 5-star ratings help our podcast get shown on more people's suggested podcast pages, which means more people will hear our show. It just takes a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us a lot. And of course, liking us on social media, interacting with our posts, and sharing things with your friends is great too. No matter how you choose to support us, even if it's just by listening, we appreciate you being here. Until next time, I'm Dan Wallach, and this is My Baseball History.